Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Place and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We will get started just by going through a little bit of housekeeping, if you can, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed live for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the car park at the front of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got quite a busy agenda this evening, so we can jump straight into it. Can I just ask if there's any apologies first, please?
Yes, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Vanessa Ricketts.
And any substitute members? I don't think we have any.
No substitute members, Chair.
Great, thank you. And do any members have any declarations of interest for anything on the agenda this evening? Perfect silence. Thank you. And item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting, which was the meeting which was held on the 20th of November 2024, that long ago. Is everyone happy to approve those minutes or got anything they want to say? Could take that as consensus. Great. Thank you very much. And on to public issues, Rebecca.
There are no public issues, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. So we can dive straight into the main agenda for this evening. And we'll go on to item 6, which is recommendation from portfolio holders, Cabinet or Council. And what we're actually going to do is move this item to the end of the agenda when we discuss the work plan, as it will fit in better there. There's a few items which we've been asked by full council and cabinet, and we also have an additional scrutiny request as well, so we can go through all of those together at the end if everyone's okay with that. Wonderful, thank you. And then we go on to the response from cabinet to the recommendations from this committee. So this item is providing feedback which we've had from the Cabinet on the recommendations which came from the budget working group, which we had doing for us. So all we're going to be asked to do in this is to note the response which we've had. And that was that the approach to tackling empty homes is a key focus of the refreshed housing strategy delivery plan, which will be being brought to Cabinet in March, it says, but that's actually April now that will be taken to Cabinet. That carries an action to develop an empty homes plan by March 2026, and co-production opportunities will be considered as part of this work. Does anyone want to discuss that or add anything to that? Okay, great, then we can say that that's noted. And we can move on to the meat of our agenda. So the first main item this evening is the Climate Action Annual Report. And I'd like to welcome Councillor Andy Hadley, the portfolio holder for Environment, and Neil Short is here, and also Isla as well. So Andy, would you like to introduce this report to us, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this obviously is my second annual report in this role, but it's the fifth of the council, and it highlights our progress to date. And what we've done, as I promised last year, was we've revised very significantly, thanks to the efforts from Neil and the team, revised the reporting very significantly, and you've had an informal chance to familiarise yourself with the dashboard, which is available to the public to view, and something that we are continually developing. In fact, Neil keeps telling me he's changed something on it almost daily at the moment, which is great. But the concept of that is that it allows us to be transparent about what progress we've got, what gaps we have to achieve, and also it starts to address the request from full council to lay out very clearly what our targets are, what our options are, and some of the difficult decisions we need to make if we're actually going to achieve our climate targets. So that's the purpose of the report as it is before you. I think our progress this year has been a bit disappointing in terms of the internal progress, and some of that is because we've taken on additional buildings that have come back into the organisation, where we now have the energy requirements of those. We have an increased number of electric vehicles, so what was using diesel is now using electricity. We have some heat pumps as well, and some changes to the infrastructure. So we have a slightly larger footprint, I think, than we had before, which isn't the direction I'd like to be reporting to you. But I think we also have a much clearer work plan, and we've met with estates and with others to try and identify measures that we can take and quantify the things that we need to do. And I think that's part of working up the interim targets, which we're really keen to do. And we have also had some successes, and the case studies point to some of the work that we've been doing to specifically, for example, the Two Rivers Meat Centre, where we have now a very large solar array on the top of that building, and heat pumps that are taking a significant bit of the load that was previously using gas. So that one is an example, but there are others on there that hopefully will be useful to the committee. I'll leave it there and answer queries. I think that's okay, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Neil, I believe you're going to share the climate dashboard so we can all have a view of that while this is going through. Brilliant. Can you confirm, is this now live on our website, and how would people be able to get to it if they wanted to view it?
Yes, Chair, it was live the moment that the papers for this meeting were published. There is a link in the report that will take the public directly to this. But also, wanting it to be even more visible than that, it will be on a web page so that people can find it through our website to the sustainability pages and find this performance aspect. So once it's been viewed by this meeting and been to Cabinet, it will then be completely available through the website. But anyone looking at the papers for this meeting will be able to access this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, I will open this up to the committee to ask any questions which you've had on it. I think we had a pre-briefing on the dashboard, and we've all had a chance to play around with it and get involved. So would anyone like to go first? Yes, Councillor.
Can I just pick up on this issue of the website? Because as Councillor Hadley said, this was the second time he's produced a report, and that's fine. But I went on the website and I put in exactly that climate action annual report. And I'm thinking about, I suppose, a lot of the keyboard warriors who we all encounter at times. And I really want it on the website so that when I go and put in climate action annual report, that's what comes up. But it doesn't. It didn't. Last year's didn't come up, and this, I understand why, but this year's hasn't come up. And I just want it so that if a resident says to me, "How can I find it?" you say, "Well, you put in climate action report, and it will be there." But that's not the situation as it exists at the moment, and I'd really like some clarification as to when we can simplify things so that when we advise people to do things and go on the website, it's there. Thank you.
Councillor Hadley.
I've literally just typed climate report BCP, and there's a web page, sustainability and carbon reduction, and it has our climate reports on it. So I think the key is for BCP Council. So if you add BCP to it, it should take you straight to it, or certainly did for me just now. And it's got three of our most recent reports there.
Well, I mean, I'm not here to stick knives in anybody. It was simply that, well, I went to the BCP website, and then I put in climate action annual report, and it didn't come up. That was, I'm sorry, I'm being pedant, but that's what I'm talking about.
I think what we're asking is, can we make this very easy somehow to get to it from the homepage?
Absolutely. Yeah, we want anyone who wants to see it to be able to see it as easily as possible. So if we're finding, obviously, it can be found, but if we're finding that coming in a particular way or doing a particular search is not there, we need to put it right. So if you leave it with me, I'll have a word with our IT team tomorrow. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that is one of the most important things, being able to gain access to this and it being really easily available. But what I do want to do is thank you and your team and IT as well for getting this up, because this is something which we discussed at this time last year and said we really wanted to see, and we wanted to be available for every resident to be able to look at and see what action's being taken, and that we've come this far and it's now available, I think is a really great step forward in where we are. So having that more widely available and hopefully being able to shout about it and use it as an example for other local authorities and other businesses in the local area as well who wanted to display what they're doing and what they're taking is a really good leadership step that you've taken. Yes, Neil.
I know that some of you, if not all of you, have seen it and had a chance to play with it, but as Councillor Hadley says, it is changing on a daily basis at the moment, as we're finding things that we can add to it, extra data we can put on it and so on. So would it be helpful if I just pushed a few buttons and sort of demonstrated a little bit of what it does for anyone who hasn't been entirely involved so far?
I think that would be really useful, yeah, please.
So, okay, I will do that, and I won't take too long doing it, but I'll leave that on. Okay. So if we look at the view we've got at the moment, this is the home page. So this is what the public can see if they use the link in the report at the moment, and will see from the website. We come straight here, and we have some buttons on left and right. So we have a help button, and that explains how this dashboard replaces or will replace the conventional annual reports. So there's a little bit of explanation around why we have it. There are buttons that can take you back to the home page, so that helps us around. There's a page on accessibility, because we want everyone to be able to access this and make the most of it. We will be adding to this page, but it is there currently with an idea of how you can view the page differently. Hopefully some members will remember that when we spoke to them about this and demonstrated an earlier version, they had ideas about maybe frequently asked questions being on there. So we have taken that on board, and there is now a page where frequently asked questions will be posted. So far there haven't been many frequently asked questions, but we're anticipating there may be. So that will be a growth area. We also have a feedback form, because we understand people might want to say things about this. And in fact, we would welcome very much people letting us know if they like this or if it's useful. So there's a form there to enable that to be a very easy process. You can see here that the dashboard is split into two areas. One is the BCP Council, so that looks at the Council's operational emissions. The other is the BCP area, so that looks at the area-wide emissions. Now the data comes from two different places. For the Council, the data is ours. We obviously pay the bills, so we know the numbers involved. For the area, we have to rely on the government to provide data on the areas and the sectors that they select and want to report on. And they give us information that is slightly different to the information that we collect. So we have to draw that distinction. If we take a little look at the Council side then, this is the view of the dashboard that you are welcomed with immediately. It might have changed slightly from the version that you've seen before, because it is changing as we improve things and as people make suggestions. There's a bit more help up here. We have a help page that shows you around. So if you're new to the dashboard, this shows you what everything does. And the key features. Let me just go back. Hang on, I've got something in the way. There we are. And then there's also something which might be helpful to people, the definitions button. So if you come to this and you're not entirely sure what a scope 1 is or scope 2, you're not sure what we mean by the sectors, it's all explained in very, very simple terms there. So that's a handy reminder. So you can see we've got the information for the 5 reporting years, so the 5 years that we've produced annual reports. Firstly, we have it broken down by scope in that graph that is in the main display that you can see I'm hovering over, and this illustrates that as you hover over things, you get pop-out information. So if you're thinking, oh, what is that? How much is that? It does pop up so you can see it. So just be patient and it will appear. So you have the 5 columns representing the 5 years of our reporting. It's split into scopes, scope 1, 2 and 3, which is explained elsewhere. It's quite handy because you can select whatever you like. I will say at this point, whatever you select will dictate the information you see in terms of this is the total emissions. If you select 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, the total emissions will change because that's what's being displayed. If you select scope 1 only, the emissions will change because that's what's displayed. The one thing that won't change is the little table to the right at the bottom of your screen, because that shows you the percentage emissions from each sector across the 5 years. Now, whatever you select, that will stay there. The reason we've got that is so that it focuses your attention, in case it wanders, as to what are the biggest hitters. What are the sectors where most of our emissions come from? And you can see there, leased out buildings very clearly is the top, followed by gas, then vehicle fuel, then electricity. So that will stay there so that you can be reminded of that. But elsewhere, you can see things like the tree map, which I've just hovered over. You look at leased out buildings and a little pop-out comes to show you that of our leased out buildings, our Bournemouth-based housing represents roughly half of those emissions, followed by the pool housing stock, followed by leisure centres and then other buildings. So there's information that pops out here and there, which we hope is quite useful. You can see the electricity there, some is for buildings, some is for street lights. But everything that's illustrated here is dependent on what you select. And I'll illustrate that by selecting the baseline year, 2019, because this is what features in our reporting, and also the last year that we're reporting on, which is 2023-24. So we look at those 2 years, and we can see that from the baseline, over the 5 years we've been reporting, we have reduced emissions from the council operations, only by 3,000 tonnes, but we have reduced them. We are going the right way in that view. An interesting, and one of my favourite features, is this one here, the little trend lines. So down at the bottom there, just on the right hand side, if we look down those, the trend lines show you, is this going the right way? Mostly yes. The little dot without the line means that we didn't have this as part of our baseline initially, so this has been added. So things like home working were not in the baseline, but they have been added. So all the time, as Councillor Hadley says, we're gathering sources of emissions, okay, which is not what we want to do, but we want this to be as complete as possible, so we welcome those emissions, and then we report on them, we try and reduce them. The one thing that's going the wrong way, you can see, is leased out buildings. So again, that's saying that is an important one, but most other things going the right way. They are reducing. So that's across the 5 years. Let's just take a look at the last reporting year. And as you can see there, our emissions actually went up. So they went up by 500 tonnes. Now, where can we account for that? And again, if we look at the trend lines down here, we can see it wasn't business travel, that went down. But commuting went up, electricity use went up, vehicle fuel went down, gas went down, which is good news because gas was troubling us last year, if you remember. That was going the wrong way. It's now going the right way. Home working going down, leased out buildings, that's going up. Paper use down, refrigerant down. Transmission follows electricity, so we're not surprised that that's going up. Waste has gone up a small bit, water has gone down. So you can see there the things that have gone the right way, things that have gone the wrong way. If we want to drill down further, and I won't do it now, but if you hover over things, there are options to drill down, and you can do interesting things by clicking that. There's lots of interesting functionality, so do play around. But if we want to drill down further, go across to the left to the data table, and this will then give you a bit of a clue as to what's happened. So it's just displaying the last 2 years, because that's all we've selected. We can look at the numbers. Business travel, yeah, you can see that went down a little bit. Commuting, that went up a little bit, as the trend line showed us. We come to electricity, and there's a difference there of around 600 tonnes. So that gives us an indication of where the increases have happened. But there's ups and downs across the board, as there always will be. So that just shows us a little bit around how we can use this to get a bit more information. It doesn't give us the answers. Only debate, discussion, further information can give us the answers. But this will show us where we're going and how we get there. I will just swap across to look at the area-wide emissions. And it's a very similar display. One thing to explain here is that the government provides us with information on Scope 1 and Scope 2. So emissions from fuel burned in our area, Scope 1, and electricity used in our area, which has emissions elsewhere, Scope 2. Government tends to restrict us to that. Because we want to report on Scope 3 as well, that's the emissions that happen elsewhere from all the other things we do, like procuring, like from getting rid of waste and so on. We know from past work done by the Scatter project, which is Manchester University, that our emissions were estimated to be around about 20%, Scope 3, 20% of Scope 1 and 2 combined. So what we've done is carried that thinking through. It may or may not be exactly right, but it's the best guess we've got because clever people came up with them. And so we've carried that through and we've added a Scope 3 into this. So that means we can complete the picture, Scope 1, 2 and 3, all the different emissions from the sectors. But Scope 3 is not very detailed, it's just a block on its own. But it's added to all the graphs that you can see here. The functionality is exactly the same as it was on the previous dashboard. We can select years, we can select scopes, we can select sectors. We've got the data table, we've got the graphs. The most obvious graph is the line graph to the right. Because if you're thinking, what are all the sectors doing? You look at that. It's not dramatic in most cases. Emissions are staying roughly the same for a lot of these sectors. But where it's different are the higher ones, of course. You've got transport, that's the yellow line. It took a hit during COVID when we weren't moving around, so emissions reduced, but it very quickly recovered. And the other one, the top line, is domestic energy use. So that's gas and electric used in housing. And that is, after being quite static for a while, beginning to come down. Now, of course, there are many reasons that might be. The decarbonisation of the electricity grid, so not relying on coal, but relying on nuclear, renewables and gas. That can improve things. It could well be that some of the insulation programs, the energy saving schemes that the government come up with, the energy companies come up with, we operate some locally as well. It could be that is having an effect. It could well be, conversely, we are doing work at the moment, and our communities team is doing work around helping those households who don't have enough cash to heat their homes. And so it could be that people can't afford to heat their homes and so don't as much as they should. So there's lots of reasons, pros and cons, as to why that might be happening, as to why the emissions are falling in the domestic sector. But you can see that is the most obvious sector where there are gains at the moment. So just to move on, Chair, may I? I don't want to hog the time.
I was going to say, I think we've got quite a good idea and it's given quite a lot to explore. But if there's something particular you want to point out in this that you think is going to be very useful to the debate, please do. But otherwise, I think we can jump into it.
I think I'll leave it there, see where the debate goes, and then maybe come back a little bit later.
That sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask the first question on this because I think we've got one big elephant in the room question, which is based on the homepage, which is the progress bar from 2019 to now and how much work we've got to do until 2030. This is pretty much our halfway point, and realistically, we'd be expecting to see progress hitting that halfway point, yet we're at 8.7% reduction based on 2019. So the question is, why have we only hit an 8.7% reduction? Have we previously been ambitious enough? What could we have done better? And how are we going to make the reductions over the next 5 years of the remaining 93%.
Chair, if I might start off, and Neil perhaps show you. So this ties to I think you're right. The ambition has not been strong enough, but I think we have been in a really difficult time in terms of looking at whether we as a council are solvent in terms of the financial constraints, and particularly around the SEND, special needs children's services and social care. And so a lot of services have just been struggling to survive rather than being able to get them to concentrate on this agenda. This agenda is really important for our long term, vitally important for our long term, and actually the 2030 target is not about, it is a commitment from government, but it's a commitment from government based on a recognition that the changes to the planet are actually going to be really severe to us if we don't do stuff. So this is the target button which Neil's just pressed, and what I've tried to do on the left here, we have been looking at the roadmap to 2030 for our internal scope 1 and 2, and it highlights some of the actions that we hope to take. Sorry, it's a little bit small on here. In fact, I can't read on the screen in front of me. But the orange line it suggests that for electricity supply, we could get to a 93% reduction by taking a number of steps over the next 5 years. And that includes initially monitoring and controlling use. So this is our corporate electricity use. Monitoring and controlling use, increasing the electric vehicle charging, actually increases our energy use. But the big one is moving to a fully procuring an electricity supply, which we're in the train of doing. We are working through that right now in terms of not just buying renewable obligations for one of the big 6 companies, but looking to buy clean energy direct from a producer. And that would be the big one. The issue that we haven't developed all the detail on this, and it's partly because we need to go through a procurement process, is exactly what that will cost and whether it will be at a premium to what we already pay. And then the question behind that is whether we can afford to do that as council, which will be something for council. So that's the work we kind of undertook at the beginning of this year that we would do during this year. And this is the sort of the impact of taking that. And similarly, if you look at the blue line, which is our fuel, we are starting to make progress by increasing the number of electric vehicles that we have, as opposed to internal combustion engine. That's what ICE stands for. Procuring hydrogenated vegetable oils is an interim step that we could take at a premium, and I think I mentioned in an answer last night that it would be about £250,000 extra per year if we did the HVOs. That would take us to about 90% reduction. Moving our fleet entirely across to electric vehicles would see a very significant reduction. So there are choices in there about that. But our real constraint on that in terms of the fleet of 600 vehicles that we have as a council is physical space in the depots to be able to do that, and for staff who take their vehicles at home at night because we haven't got space in the depots already, whether we can recharge vehicles at home and therefore give them an electric vehicle rather than an internal combustion vehicle. So those sorts of things are being worked through. That's part of the fleet strategy, which has just been looked at and passed through Cabinet and Council, and key there. The third one is gas, and again that's about what can we do to move away from gas, so things like heat pumps, and to look at more efficient use of gas, where we need to continue to do that and query that. Some of that will rely on changes to technology. Because one of the challenges that our Estates Department are grappling with is we can change our general space heating, we can change a lot of those things, but the domestic hot water supply, there's concerns about Legionella and how we can make sure that our systems are safe for use and provide hot water for domestic consumption. And we're still testing some of that in terms of, well, other people are doing that, why can't we do that? And how do we get to that point? So that's an ongoing discussion that we are having. Over on the right-hand side of this graph, and if you can move it over, are a number of those steps that we are taking, and a bit of an indication for the timeline. So I'm not, as I stand today, I'm not confident that we are going to hit the 5-year target, but I'm damn sure I'm going to try and make what I can happen on that, and that's what this indicates in terms of our plans. If you can click on scope 3. So the other part, which and go to the right, so we see the graphs. So this is all on the dashboard, so people can see it and wander around it. The big one, as was mentioned, is our leased out buildings, and at the top, the pink line is council owned homes. So this is our social housing stock, and it's a huge part of our current footprint. We have an ambition within the housing revenue account, and obviously Kieran's behind me, and portfolio holder, and Kelly, the director for that. We have an ambition to move to EPCC, which is about warmer homes, safer homes for people, and helping people in fuel poverty. Going beyond that is hugely expensive, but actually we need to have a conversation, because as far as we can see at the moment, that's only going to get 6% reduction over the next 5 years if we just go to APCC and do some stuff around PV. But going further than that is hugely expensive. And that's going to be a challenge for us as a council, whether we can get grant money, whether the government want to help to do that. But decarbonising our social housing stock is a huge issue. It's not as huge as decarbonising the private rented sector or home stock. So in terms of our wider targets, that's an even bigger problem. Sorry, I hope that was quite a long answer, but I hope that was an answer to trying to meet the ambition. But it's a big target to meet. Oh, sorry, the last one, if I may, Chair, is the green line at the bottom. This is really interesting, because we've just had some publicity about the work that we've been doing on Camford Heath to re-wet some of the heathland. And it's estimated the green line is going in the opposite direction. The green line is a positive change, but a negative figure here, because it's actually reducing the amount of carbon. So this is a direct offsetting, where we're using our heathland, the opportunity to create a wet space, capture carbon, and restore through natural systems and natural environment. And we've also got work going on Turbo Common around similarly around recreating a mere, or bringing back a mere, in order to do the same sort of things. So that's work that's going on in the green space, which is helpful to that carbon footprint.
Okay, thank you. I could go on about this particular thing as the holistic all night, but I won't. I think we probably agree that there's been some opportunities which have been missed over the last few years. Things like PPA agreements for solar, which are at no or low cost to the council, being better landlords to our commercial tenants, allowing them to find their own ways to save energy, and being enabling landlords to allow them to find no and low cost solutions as well, and making it easier for them to extend secondary leases for things like solar on their roofs and such. But it is good to see that there is a plan in place, and that is, again, on the dashboard, which people can see and go into and see as it changes. I've got Councillor Rice who wants to come in next.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Rice.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Chris, for your comments. I just wanted to continue along that thread. Sort of looking at this dashboard, there's nothing really there to highlight the concern that the portfolio holder has raised in terms of doubts about getting to the 2030 target. I feel it's important that we are able to be honest, because government need to see that we're not going to hit our target. So I'm just wondering what everybody else thinks in terms of how we communicate that to the public and to the government. We could add something into this page here, which demonstrates not on track or something like this. I was just wondering what everybody thought. But I feel there should be something to say this isn't in keeping with the Paris Agreement, or something that just explains this is not, there's big concerns here.
Councillor Hadley, should we be admitting defeat already on this?
Absolutely
It's not admitting defeat, but it's saying at the moment solvency of the council has been a priority, which is like, it just has to be done, doesn't it? Like, but if the council is going to be serious, we're not in a position at the moment to meet our targets.
I think the purpose of sharing this, it is our annual report. But in terms of the development of the dashboard, these are draft targets. We said we would come up with the targets over the course of this year. I have been having discussions with the Director of Estates and with the director who deals with our leased out buildings in terms of how can we do exactly what you just said, Chair. Being a good landlord and enabling, where we don't see the electricity bill, it's not directly our problem. How can we enable our lessees to do this work, and also where we are in a leased building, for example, with a pool library, how can we talk to the organisations that we lease buildings from in terms of how we can work together. So we are actively trying to ask those questions in order to pin down things and actually move those graphs down. And so my ambition would be to by the end of the year to be in a better place. I still think there will be a gap, and I think that's a challenge for us all. But we need to have that discussion, because that is going to have to come to how do we financially fit that. I think Gail is on the line, who's also on the climate team and is doing some really good work with Southwest Net Zero Hub and attempting to see where we can get external funding for some of these things, and that's another key strand in that.
Thank you. Councillor Rice, do you want to come back on that at all?
Well, just with regards to the committee, sort of, should there be something on this page that explains 8.7% reduction? And is that good enough? Is that appalling? Is that on target for the 2030 target? Should there be something there? I personally feel there should be.
Is that a recommendation you want to make?
Yes, but I'd also I can't. Yeah, if that's clear enough, that's absolutely fine. That would be a recommendation.
Isla, did you want to come in?
We could also put something in the corporate performance report that we get quarterly, because that has a bit more narrative around it. So where we report things like across the council, the KPIs that we have, we could flag it there, Councillor Rice, because we can put a bit more narrative around it to explain where we are and explain what that means, that 8.7, in a bit more context. So I'm not saying do it instead, but we could do it as well.
Yeah, certainly there'll be some people that want the extra information, but just in terms of this first page, I think it's important to have something there to put it in context.
Okay, if we come back to that as a recommendation at the end of this debate then, and if we can carry on through this with the next speaker, I've got Councillor Northover.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question for Neil, if that's okay. I just wondered how robust the data is ultimately, and how much is it your artistic license sort of thing? Like, how much could you make it look better if you wanted, or worse if you wanted, and how much of it is sort of coming from government or statutory kind of reporting? And then sort of further to that, we've got so many things, but could we just completely miss something because we're so caught up in all of that amazing dashboard that when you go in the annex and it's boiling hot and you sort of think, how's that still happening then? In the evening and the heating's blasting away. Do things like that get missed because we're sunk into this massive amount of data?
I know you asked, Neil, but we are actively talking with estates in terms of there's a top 25. I don't know if you want to bring up the top 25. There's a list of the top sites within the council for electricity and gas, and obviously they're different. And the top of that list is this building in terms of electricity use. So they you've got gas. That's fine.
I'll change it.
Yeah, if we go on the electricity, then it's the top site, and we sat down and had quite a long meeting with a number of key people to say what can we do about this building, and so the thing that annoys me actually is these screens, because they're on permanently and they should just be well, yes, the annex actually that's another bag of worms, and we've said, why are we even still in the annex? When if there's seats available in the main building, can we just mothball the annex, or can we get to a point where we don't have to heat it, we don't have to light it? So I think that there's something about going through these bigger buildings. Aruba is the second on the list, and I went down to the seafront and talked to the team to understand that building, why it's so big, and it's about freezers out the back that you don't even know are there, that supply ice cream along the whole seafront. So it's getting below those figures to understand. As Neil was saying, it's raising the questions. It's not giving the answers, and the answers come from talking to the experts, from trying to say to them what is stopping you from doing better. How can we help? How can we make that happen? And for me, actually, it's not the whole story, because actually the biggest thing, as you've seen, is our housing stock. But in terms of these big buildings, fixing these will have a bigger effect than fiddling around with something at the bottom. Commuting is a very small figure, for example. It's useful and important to get people to think about it, but we shouldn't be spending massive time on it. We should be worrying about why this building is so energy inefficient, what we can do about it, and we are.
And thank you, Councillor. And I'll just add, because you asked about how the figures were calculated and so on. We want to be as complete as possible and as transparent as possible. And I hope that having a dashboard like this that can be accessed anytime with all of this information on it will enable us to be as transparent as we can be. If you go to the frequently asked questions, there are some links there as to how often and how things are calculated. So there's a lot of information that people can drill down into there. But just to sort of explain it very simply, in terms of the council's own emissions, as I said, we pay the bills, so we know the numbers. We've got the electricity figures, we've got the gas figures, we've got the water figures and so on, we've got the mileage, and we gather all of that together, and then the government produces conversion factors based on lots of research that they've done in various ways to say, if you take your number and multiply it by this number, you will get the amount of carbon dioxide equivalent that you have produced by doing this activity. So that's the process we go through, by collecting all of the data, using all the conversion factors, which can change. And this is an interesting part of having a dashboard which is responsive and live, that the numbers can actually change going back. So just because you looked at it one day and it said that, actually, if we've got some better data and we've had to update some historic data because of it, then things can change. So things might be going one way one day, we change things, it's going the other way. So that's part of the fun of having it sort of responsive like that. So we use the government conversion factors, which change every year, to calculate our carbon emissions for the council. Now, as we know, the council committed to scope 1, 2 and 3, and 3 is the tough and complicated one. But we persist in putting it in. So that's why I mentioned, even though the government gives us just scope 1 and 2 figures, we like to be complete and try and put in scope 3. So we estimate, as people have done beforehand. So we use that to put that scope 3 in. So we hope we're being as complete and open and upfront as we can be. In terms of the information that comes from the government, that is set, that's calculated and given to each local authority area. And again, there's a link on the website, so if people want to go into that and see what the BCP stats are, they can, going back to 2002 or beyond. So what's provided by government is what's provided by government. What we produce is what we produce along the lines of the greenhouse gas protocol. So there are lots of documents that say, if you're going to do this, this is how, and we follow those. So hopefully we do it in the most robust way possible so that we provide the best information. Okay.
Very technical answer. Are you happy with that? Okay, next I've got Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I'll just say, put on public record my congratulations to the team for the dashboard. I know I said that in the feedback session, but it's actually great to play around with and have a look. But just going back to what a couple of the speakers have already said, and just looking at this, I mean, thinking about the budget working groups, we said about, the gap analysis, looking at, the funding for this, the kind of money we've got to put in place, and looking through the prism of that in terms of everything we do across the council, and how that keeps working, and then sort of looking at this roadmap to 2030, seeing a lot of it is obviously, I mean, it has to be at this stage now where, being in 2025, a lot of it is back-ended, and it's like, at what point, because, the interim target is going to be looked at by, potentially a completely different set of councillors. This room will look different at the time that report for that year comes forward, and just in terms of councillor scrutiny, I know there'll be the consistency and continuation with the officers, and then after that, the 2030 targets, potentially you're looking at after another election again. How much are we certain sat here now, and people are going to be looking back and saying, what was the legacy of the people who sat here at this point as we're trying to reach those targets, is actually achievable? At what point will we say, us as councillors now, okay, we are heading towards where we're going to see that big reduction on, gas in 2028? How confident, at what point do we know if we're going to go flying right by those targets, sort of as soon as possible with the work that's going on to get us to that point? And also, is that kind of gap analysis, where does that currently sit? Because I'm just mindful we don't want to get to another budget working group again, and basically we sat down and said, God, this is a massive piece of work, and we've got to get into all this. And because it is, it's kind of like we could be doing that every year and just letting things drift even further, because we're saying, yeah, okay, we've got to start now, and we don't actually quite get to that point where it all becomes holistic. I know it's a lot there, but.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. I think you're right, and part of that is the lag in terms of identifying exactly what we need to do. We've a committee will try and do that this year, and then there's a lag around procuring stuff or identifying we've got the money and then procuring stuff. So there are a number of reasons why we can't just snap our fingers and make things happen. As you know, the council processes are quite laborious because we have to show that we've been fair with all the market and those sort of things, and also looking after public money to the best of our ability. So there is a lag. I think it's very difficult to contemplate what councillors 5 years' time might think about what the councillors would do stuff now we're thinking. But I think if we can lay out our ambition where we need to be, some of this is about choices, and some of those lines will shift because it will be around, well, actually, there's, sometimes we do procurements, we don't actually get an answer, we don't get an affordable solution come forward in response, and therefore you've got to either say, well, do we change what we're doing, or do we go back to market again and hope that's still that becomes available. So there is bound to be uncertainty in that, but unless we lay out those interim targets and those interim actions and have a sensible adult debate about whether that's what we can afford to do as a council, or if we can't afford to do it, what else do we do? Because the other element of this, and it was misquoted yesterday by a member of the public, came to the council meeting. It's been estimated that if we don't, if we just carried on and ignored the climate emergency, we would get to a point where government they might choose not to, but they could implement a £3 million a year fine effectively, or a carbon offsetting that would cost us that much money. So there's something about, if we don't get on and do these things, then we would have to do carbon offsetting. And actually, that could be planting trees in another country, which is of no value to the residents in BCP, and it would be their tax monies that were going off to do that. So we'd much rather, and I think the Camford Heath bog is a really good example of where we can improve our natural environment for nature within BCP that people can experience if they want to. It's the back side of Camford Heath. Rather than have to pay to offset and have those interventions happen elsewhere. So we'll get to a point where there's a residual which you just can't make. Don't know where that is yet. Hoping we're going to get clarity about that this year, and that's our promise. And there will be a decision for councillors in 2030 to go, okay, so now what are we going to do? And is that local or is it elsewhere?
Thank you. Councillor Martin, do you want to come back on that at all? No, okay. Councillor Dalton-Gibson.
Thank you. I was going to raise the same issue of being a bit alarmed at only 8.7%, but I think we've dealt with that. And I was also going to raise the £3 million. Are we factoring that into our affordability sort of decisions? Can we afford this? Well, can we afford not to do this sort of mindset, bearing in mind consequence? Going back to the 8.7, if you look at paragraph 2, in paragraph 2, we've got emissions at 8.7, which I understand to be since 2019, and then it says last year it was 9.9. Effectively, what we're saying there is that's because the emissions have gone up this year. Is that correct? The reason I ask is when I looked at it, I couldn't believe after 6 years out of 11, we were only on 8.7 for the whole period. I thought maybe we were talking about the year, but that wasn't what it was saying. So I was just trying to clarify that understanding.
Councillor Hadley?
Yes, that's correct, and it is regrettable, but it's partly because our activity was suppressed following the COVID period. We've sort of we've increased back, and as I said, particularly on electricity, we have an increase because we've moved away from a fuel to electricity, and we're not using renewably reduced electricity yet, but we are actively trying to move to that.
Thank you. In fact, that was the next point I was going to ask. In 2024, about 51% of electricity in this country was generated for zero carbon emissions. I cannot understand why burning a fossil fuel at about 20-25% efficiency in a vehicle and you switch to electricity, of which at least 50% is zero carbon and the motor is far more effective, why you think that increases the emissions. That should make it go down. I mean, you're effectively saying that if we all switch to electric cars, then the emissions would go up, which I don't think anybody would agree with. So I'm just trying to understand why you're quoting the switch from diesel to... I understand the electricity would go up, but of course there should be a correspondingly greater drop in our fossil fuels from the vehicle fuels, if there's any logic in switching to electric cars. And the same is true with the heat pumps. You know, we all know a coefficient of performance, you're looking at, even in a bad installation, you'll get 2. So that ought to mean that the gas drops, the electricity goes up a little bit, but nowhere near as much as the gas drops. So I'm not thinking at the moment that we're quite seeing this straight.
Yes, I think you're correct, and I'd have to defer, and I don't know whether Neil will have the answer, but in terms of the electricity mix that we get from via our nationally agreed contract at the moment, will have an element of green electricity in it, which ought to affect the carbon footprint of that. But I don't know what's factored into the figures as they currently exist. So I have to defer to Neil if you know.
Yeah, I'll have to come back to the issue of conversion factors, because we would convert our electricity use in kilowatt hours to tons of CO2 equivalent using the conversion factor that the government gives us for the fuel mix in a particular year. And the fuel mix currently, as we know, coal has dwindled, thankfully, but it will be renewables, gas, and nuclear. I don't know the percentages, but obviously we can find out. Our utilities manager will be on top of all that. So yeah, that would be it.
It's not the. I mean, I understand the mix, and I don't know. Do you get the mix for you personally, or do you just go on a national figure?
We can find out from our supplier through the laser framework.
I don't think it actually makes any difference, other than the fact that even if you ran 100% electric, because the petrol engine, diesel engine is like 20% efficient, running electricity which runs at 80% efficiency, you're winning straight off. So that, you know, it's just not, to me, answering the question. We're seeing data, but we're not actually getting meaningful information out of that, because what I'm hearing is not aligning with everything else and you know how much I've read and studied on it. It's just going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still on. Sorry. It goes back to the point that I made, that we can present this, but we don't have all the answers, and we need to drill down further and talk to those people like the utilities manager who buy our energy, and can access exactly what the mix is, and our fleet manager, who looks after the vehicles. They can maybe provide us with the answers as to why it's doing what it's doing. But of course, we don't mind things going to electricity, because you can decarbonise that. So if gas use is going down, as I said in my presentation, we're fine with that. If electricity use is going up, we're fine with that also, because if we find that renewable supply and the council's willing to procure that, then our emissions will disappear from scope 2. So it's all about the decisions that are going to be made going forward. Hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got 2 more speakers on my list at the moment. I've got Councillor Wright and Councillor Rice. Does anyone else want to speak after those two councillors? Yeah, Councillor Goodall, and is that it? Okay, Councillor Wright, please.
Just wanted to ask, you go back to 2019 is the starting point. What is that in numbers? What is the tonnes? I'm sure it's on the dashboard somewhere. I couldn't find it. I can't actually get it on here.
Can you turn your microphone on, please? Thank you.
Sorry, there we are. Yeah, if we go to the BCP Council page, we have to make sure we select the right thing. Otherwise, we'll be told the wrong thing. So if we select the year 2019-20, and then if we have a look, it appears in several places, but the easiest one, I think, is if you look along the top, all the coloured blocks, if you get to the end of where it says total, 48,000. Total. For that year, for the baseline year.
48,000 tonnes
of carbon dioxide equivalent.
Okay. Okay. Are we taking into account capital carbon cost? Like when we buy a electric vehicle, obviously there's a carbon cost to its manufacture, and when we build 100 new eco homes or whatever, there's a carbon cost to building them. I couldn't see.
We're not taking that into account at the moment because no, we're not taking into account the carbon cost of buying something. That would be part of procurement. Procurement would fall into scope 3, and if we can quantify the cost of things that we buy, we will more than happily add it to the dashboard. That will, of course, increase our footprint quite dramatically. Yeah, but if that's what you'd like to do, then that's an interesting point. I think Councillor Hadley wants to comment.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, certainly on things like our flooding, coastal risk erosion, I know they take what measures they can, and also in transportation to use I've mixed two things. The flooding, coastal risk erosion, they've looked at the carbon footprint of construction. So, for example, the Long Groin, they looked very closely at how they could reduce the carbon impact of that. In resurfacing our roads, we're looking at recycling measures because that means a lot less truck movements and again reducing the carbon emissions. So it is a consideration, but it doesn't flow through to these figures. I think at the moment is what we're saying.
I don't know anywhere else. I think that should be in there. I think that the cost of, if you buy a new electric dust cart, that's going to save you carbon in its use. Its deficit at the beginning should be there first. Otherwise, this doesn't seem like there's a lot of point in it. Heat pumps, they take carbon to make them. All of these things, they take carbon to make them. You answered, yeah, how is it measured? You answered that, Lisa, so thank you.
Councillor Wright, that was starting to sound like the formation of another recommendation to go from here. I don't know if you wanted to try and put something into words and send it across to us, and maybe we can add it to Councillor Rice's at the end of this item.
Is the terminology right? Capital carbon cost, is that what you'd call it? I don't know what you'd call it. The cost of carbon in manufacturing the item.
Embedded carbon?
Embedded carbon, that'll do. Yeah.
Okay, while you're thinking about that, can I go to Councillor Rice again, please?
Yeah, well, I completely agree, and that was something that I was going to raise. So thank you for raising that. I was going to raise it slightly differently in terms of what are we not including in this. Something that I know we're not including is aviation. So I was thinking along the lines of in the total emissions sector, where you've got sort of business, commuting, electricity, fuel, gas, leased out, sort of somewhere along there underneath. This does not include emissions from aviation. And I think shipping is another thing that's not included. And people understand that flying is a high emitter, and it's important that people realise that this 12% reduction does not include some of the biggest emitters of transportation. But that's exactly the same as, like, I had assumed that we were including the carbon footprint of the embedded carbon of producing an electric dust cart. So that's really, really helpful that we have identified that that's not included in the scope 3. If we're writing down that we've got scope 3 there, but we're not actually, that there's lots of things that we're not putting in, then it needs to be a partial scope 3 sort of thing. And yeah, I really welcome something to highlight what we are not including.
Councillor Hadley, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Chair. I feel a Don Rumsfeld moment coming on. We know there are lots of unknowns, and one of those, and I've been trying to push a lot on, is our solar generation. So we have solar panels on the roofs of quite a lot of buildings, and no one can tell me how much that is. And so that's energy that doesn't appear here either, because that's renewably produced energy that we're consuming mostly ourselves. But it doesn't appear. And what I'd love to be able to tell you is what proportion of our energy we are self-generating, and therefore it's not free, because again there's the capital cost. I think the other bit in terms of the dust carts that's interesting is that there's a net difference, because there's clearly a cost in producing a dust cart, whatever combustion it uses, and so it's understanding the difference between the two would need to be part of that calculation. But I absolutely take the point, and I think there's also the point of recycling the device, at the end of its life as well. So you get whole life carbon footprints too, which is again a part of that.
Unless I was understanding incorrectly, I think what Councillor Wright was asking for the embedded carbon in everything, regardless of whether it's an electric bin lorry or whether it's a diesel one. It's just whatever it is we're purchasing should be accounted for. Neil, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, just briefly on Councillor Rice's question. I imagine you're looking not at the council's dashboard, but you're looking at the twin dashboard for the area when you talk about aviation, because that's where you would expect to see that. And in adding our scope 3, our estimated scope 3, taking what the Scatter project did a few years ago, is our attempt to add in aviation. Now, aviation is always going to be controversial. How much do you include? Which bit of aviation do you include? Where does it belong? Who owns it? Scatter took the approach of takeoffs, landings, and so on, the sort of emissions that they could actually attach to an airport, and they came up with a figure. And so when we take the 20% of our scope 1 and 2 and call that our scope 3, it's very crude, but it's our attempt to be upfront, again, as I said, and honest about what our total emissions for the area actually are. We can argue whether it is right and whether it includes everything it should, but that's our attempt to do the right thing, because the council committed to reducing scope 1, 2 and 3, so we want to be as complete as we can be. So if you're looking for aviation, it will be in scope 3 in the area-wide dashboard. But we don't actually mention it by that name, but that's where it is.
Okay, Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, I think the other caution on that is that it's really difficult for us to estimate the number of people who from this area fly out of Gatwick or Heathrow, or the shipping that's bringing containers to the UK from Taiwan. That end up in the BCP area. So I think there's some real things about international shipping and international aviation that it's really difficult for us to measure on a local basis. There are national measures. I think that's why government leave it out of their targets, is because assigning that to a particular geographical area is actually quite difficult. And I think, alongside this, and again, it's back to this is measuring what we think we can measure, is the general principles of knowing that if you're going to do a holiday in the UK and not fly, then your carbon footprint is very significantly less. And the encouragement to people to think about their carbon footprint, aside from measuring everything to the nth degree. There's always a challenge in only changing the things you can measure, when we know there are other things that are also important.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, is this directly related to... Yeah,
just very quickly, I was just going to say, my brother works at Bristol Airport, that's just gone carbon neutral, just announced carbon neutral. My son works at Herne or Bournemouth Airport, which is just about to announce it. And the way they've done it is that none of the planes belong to them, so they don't take into account any flights. So I just thought.
What an easy way to get out of it, eh? Okay, and the last question is going to be from Councillor Goodall.
Yeah, sorry, may not be strictly speaking. Will you bear with me because it's not? I'm not sure about scrutiny, but as a foot soldier, I just wonder about the educational side of what we do, in the sense that I deal with, say, 3 residents' associations. I've been looking for my own personal, looking at things like heat pumps, car chargers, solar panels, and I just get to the stage where I'd really like it if there was some system within the process so that when one goes along, you can almost go 1, 2, 3. So you put your solar panels in first, possibly. You put your batteries in for your solar panels. You then put your heat pump in, and then you put your electric car charger in. I'm not saying that order's correct, but all I'm saying is I'd really like to be able to go along. A lot of these, I say a lot, I deal with 3 residents' associations, which is great, but quite often they want relevant material to talk about. So we've had drains, we've had a lot of topics, which has been great. But this is one thing that I think we're talking about things that we know about because we use the website. We have committee meetings like this, but actually we're not actually possibly getting onto the ground as much as we should. And that's where, if we're going to bring the residents with us, that possibly we should be going more.
Do you want to respond to that, Councillor Hadley?
Yes, I was actually going to invite Isla to respond, if I may.
I think it's a really good point, and I think it's about us giving you the material to be able to have those conversations, and I think we've got plans to reset the Champions Network as well. But you're right, I think we do some around how to access grants and how to access funding, but I think there's something about being joined up, so I think we should take that away, Neil, and have a think about it.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Communication is one of our top priorities. But interestingly, what you've done, Councillor, you've made me think now, because we have a piece of work which is very, very soon coming to fruition called the Local Area Energy Plan. You will have heard of it, I'm sure. We mention it in our reports. It's a piece of work that's been ongoing for a year now, and it's to provide a look at the whole energy system throughout the area, and looking to the future. How are we going to supply the energy? How can we become renewable, and so on? How can we get to net zero? One of the recommendations that is forming from that is for a retrofit centre. Now that would be an organisation, a place that would be able to communicate this to residents. Things like, what do I do first? What are the best technologies? What works? So all the questions that you're asking and your residents' associations are asking. So hopefully, very, very soon, we will have something like this forming that will be of fantastic use to people. And the Local Area Energy Plan is very, very near completion, so it will be coming to this group for further discussion. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hadley, can you be brief?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. So it's also working with third parties. So we work particularly around people in fuel poverty, and through using a local company, and insulation is top of that list. But I'm really conscious that we're not working with people who can afford to do some of these measures themselves, and sometimes the people who do talk to them are taking significant amounts of money to do not very much work. So there's something about how we can encourage the right messages to get out there.
Okay, look forward to seeing. Okay, Neil.
If I promise to be so brief, we're sitting here and showing you this. I have to say, hand on heart, it's the climate team who have done such a lot of work to present this, and the council's IT team who have made the dashboard and made it functional like it is. So I want, if on record, we could have a thank you to the climate team and also to IT who have made it possible. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, noted. And I did tell a slight fib because I'm going to go to Councillor Dalton Gibson just for one last comment.
Well, it was also about the discussion on sort of a recommendations, although I would say about the batteries and the solar that, of course, the answer is there is no answer. Because if you live in a flat, you don't have a roof, you can't do solar. So it will vary by property. And indeed, now that we're going to bi-directional car chargers, actually, why don't you use your car as the battery? So it's a very fluid thing, I'm afraid. The comment I wanted to make on the measurement was I'm quite concerned that about, that we're looking at this almost as though there's too much gospel. I take the point about the embedded carbon, although, as you said, it would be in everything, but those would have to become very estimated figures. Not many manufacturers will give you a carbon output. I mean, even the petrol and the diesel, do they include in its carbon output all the drilling and the flying out to oil rigs in the North Sea? How far down you go. And I would have thought that what we need to do is manage the things that we can measure, because if we can't really meaningfully measure them and we're guessing it, we've only got to have a change in our guessing algorithm and suddenly our emissions go up. And I would, rather than widen it out into more and more guesswork, which is going to make it less and less accurate, I would actually rather, I think the scope 3 we can get away with because we can ring fence it and just say, well, that's an estimate, but we know 1 and 2 because we've measured it. And you also get into what you might call depreciating embedded carbon. Do we put it all in the year we buy it, or do we I would suggest that we don't go down the route of guesstimation and we stick to what we actually know, and then we know we're making the progress, and it's no other change.
Thank you very much. Okay, so during that debate, we've had a couple of recommendations come up. One from Councillor Rice, but whilst Councillor Rice isn't in the room, she can't actually make a recommendation. So I'll make that recommendation on her behalf from the chair's seat. Rebecca, could I ask you to read out what it is, please, so everyone can hear it? And then I'll look for a seconder, and then we can debate or vote on it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. The committee proposed that on the front page of the BCP greenhouse gas emissions dashboard, an additional box is added to highlight the context of any carbon reduction relevant to the annual carbon reduction target.
Thank you. Is everyone clear on that? Great. I think at this point as well, we should decide where this recommendation is going to go. I think normally we do recommendations to Cabinet, but this one seems more appropriate to go directly to the portfolio holder just to make these changes, if that sounds okay. So first of all, I'll look if anyone wanted to second that recommendation. Yep, Councillor Wright, thank you. And is there any discussion on it? Councillor Northover.
I suppose when you look at it, where it's in green, it looks like we're winning and we've achieved. So perhaps something underneath that just shows progress, where it could be like red, amber. So we're only showing that it's green once it's past 80% or something.
So just a bit of refinement on what it looks like more than amending it at all. Lindsay, do you want to come in?
I only wanted to flag that within the meeting chat, Councillor Rice has added that she wanted to also propose something around annual targets being developed. So I want to check whether the committee wants to bring that in to the recommendation you're proposing.
Well spotted, thank you. Councillor Rice, did you want to speak to that?
Well, in the proposal, I've put relevant to the annual carbon reduction target. So the additional information regarding that is sort of if we have I don't know if you can all see, but the volume under the curve is relevant. So particularly for 2050, if we keep going with high carbon and then suddenly stop, that's not the same as sort of having a curve that's, oh, sorry, the wrong way around. Anyway, I think you all understand what I mean. So it was just, I haven't seen anywhere that we have annual targets. And so I just wanted to raise that I've put that in the proposal, but actually it's sort of an additional point maybe that we, does everyone agree that it would be useful to have annual carbon reduction targets to help us keep better track?
Thank you. Is everyone able to see that addition? And I think it does make sense to add that onto the existing recommendation. It does seem to fit within it. If Councillor Wright, once you've had a chance to read it, if you're happy to continue seconding it with that amendment. Okay, great. Any more discussion around that at all? Councillor Matt.
So has that has that been done? Because there was a caveat there, like, or has that already been done? I mean, is there some document somewhere that says, I know we're not hitting from where we should be coming down from 2019, but then obviously there's a roadmap within here. So, like, is there any where Felicity says in the chat, or has that already been done? Has that already been done? The annual targets.
Councillor Hadley.
Yes, so last year I think I said I was really keen on producing some interim targets. They weren't necessarily annual, but they were interim between now and the end point. And then at full council there was a request that we come up with interim targets, which was the same thing, which I was very happy to agree to. I think that bit about are we above or below the target at the moment, we haven't got a target to say we're above or below. We know we're not progressing anywhere near as much as we'd like to. So it probably ought to be a red sort of green, but I think we need to get to the targets to be able to then say, are we doing better or worse than we thought we were doing at this point? Sorry, is that?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, because that's fine. It sort of goes back to saying, like, because those interim targets come quite obviously now where we are. They come quite late, and sort of they are put towards the end of the period that we're trying to achieve this by. So it's a little bit like you sort of feel like maybe we do need annual targets, but then obviously there's a danger to set like a really low level annual target now because we know where these changes are coming later on. So I'm just sort of torn between the two because obviously if you set annual targets, but you will be setting annual targets towards those interim targets, which would still sort of kick it further down the line, wouldn't it? So.
If I may, Chair, I'll come back to what I said earlier. I think there's something about getting the financial agreement and going through the procurement, which has a significant timeline to it anyway. So even if we set aggressive targets, I'd love to do that. I'd love to bring those things forward. HVOs as an example, we could bring that forward. We know what the cost of that would be. At the moment, going and asking Adam for, so Mr. Richard, sorry, for another £250,000 just to make that change is something we would have to go through, and his immediate response would be, well, what are we going to cut? So I think that's the piece that we need a bit of time to work that up, which will inevitably move things to the right. But I'd be very keen to do things as quickly as we can, because I absolutely get what Councillor Rice was saying about the later we leave it, the more that debt effectively is building in terms of not having achieved the targets, and also sort of not actually getting to the target.
Okay, Councillor Wright, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I support it because I'd like to see a graph on the front page somehow. You do the style. Showing a line graph where we are below it. And I think it's just honest. It's honest, and I think it would. Obviously we're going to be in the red and below and all that sort of thing, and it just focuses people's mind to where we are and how much more we got to push. And yeah, that should definitely be red, not green. But yeah.
Okay, and Councillor Rice.
Yeah, just on the targets, my personal thoughts are that it should be sort of science-based or sort of Paris Agreement aligned, as opposed to what we like sort of an ambition from the council as such. It should just be a practical, scientific. This is where we should be if we're Paris aligned.
Thank you. Any more debate on that? Or are we happy to go for a vote then? Councillor Martin.
So what are we actually voting on? Are we saying the annual target will match what to reach the interim targets that are in the reports, or is the annual target putting on a theoretical ideal?
So at the moment, Rebecca, can you read out the full recommendation, including the additional part, which we are voting on now, please?
Yeah. So the committee proposed that on the front page of the BCP greenhouse gas emissions dashboard, an additional box is added to highlight the context of any carbon reduction relevant to the annual carbon reduction target, with the extra bit of specifically the annual targets are developed.
Clear as mud.
Yeah, so it's just not specified. So it'll be who's deciding which target it is that will be listed on the website.
So from my understanding, the targets are still in development. So there are no specific targets which would be available yet. But once they are available, they would then be displayed on the front alongside the original change, which we said to display where we're up to. Lindsay.
Yeah, Chair, just if it helps the committee, later in the agenda, you'll be asked to consider a recommendation from Council, which is to do more work supporting this area. This sort of thing, like the setting of targets, is the very thing that might be worth you looking at getting involved in. And certainly if you were to just make a recommendation that targets be developed, and then also including the other recommendation that Councillor Rice had already mentioned, that's something that you can keep a track of on your action sheet, and you could come back to and have discussions with the portfolio holder about progress around that. So I don't think you need to necessarily have all the detail fleshed out today, but if you feel strongly as a committee that those should be developed, that's an excellent sort of recommendation for you to be putting forward as a committee.
Thank you for that. That's very clear. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, are we happy to move towards... Councillor Hadley, did you want to come in?
I'm sorry. Just in terms of one of the things I'm concerned about, and we tried to do, was to keep this really simple on the front page. So I absolutely get the idea that we need to show something in terms of whether we think it's good or bad, or some sort of indication. Putting graphs on here, it's something about we need to highlight that if you click on the target, you'll go through to a graph. But that's the sort of thing, and I think actually Lindsay's suggestion that having your help in what we've discussed is actually really complicated, and there's a lot of detail below this, and having something that is usable and accessible to the public is also a concern to me. So I don't want to make the front page so scary that everyone runs away from it, but I do want to make it intelligible and understandable for people, and I think that's the piece that's what we're trying to balance. And I think absolutely accept what you're suggesting, but that's a balance we need to make.
Understood. Thank you. And we're always here to bounce ideas off. In that case, can I ask if there's any dissent from this, or can we take it as agreement, or do we want to have a show of hands? No dissension? Everyone agrees? Okay, great. In that case, that recommendation can pass. There was the second recommendation which you were going to look at, Councillor Wright. Did you want to put that forward? Rebecca, could you read that out for us then, if you've got it, please?
The recommendation is that embedded carbon cost will be included in the calculation and displayed on the dashboard.
Any discussion around that? And we'll need a seconder as well for that one. I would like to make a slight amendment to it and just put where available, because what I really want to avoid is what Councillor Northover was saying before, is that we're getting so bogged down into data and finding things that we could spend the next 5 years deciding what our emissions are, and by that point it's far too late. So just to add in the words where available, I think would make this easier and not send the climate team on an expedition to find out everything. And in that case, I'll be happy to second it if you're happy with that as an amendment. Great. Any discussion?
Can I make a comment?
You can.
If we're only going to collect some of the data, we risk slewing it. So if, for example, because they're very environmentally aware, all the electric truck manufacturers put out their embedded carbon, but the diesel ones don't want to, we will end up with a frightfully slewed set of figures. So I go back to the thing that, you've got to keep the data very clean, very certain, and if you say if available, you'll get it for half the things and not the others, and it just won't be true. It won't be representative, is my concern.
I feel like that's where we already are with a lot of Scope 3 as well.
Scope 3, I agree.
Councillor Rice.
I think there is more and more information coming out by a lot of organisations that want accurate data to do with the carbon footprint. So I think we will be getting more and more information for the Scope 3. But I just wanted to say that if we aren't able to include it, then there should be a button on the the dashboard somewhere saying what we haven't been able to include in our scope 3, and just a simple list. I think there'll be people that are very knowledgeable in this area, and they will want to just know whether it's been included or not. So I think that would be something that would be useful to have.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I have just been asked for some clarity of whether this is going to be a recommendation to the portfolio holder or to Cabinet again. And I think, again, as this is around the production of this and the ongoing maintenance of the dashboard, that this should again be to the portfolio holder unless anyone particularly objects. Okay, in that case, can I ask for a show of hands for... Sorry, Councillor Martin?
So on your amendment, just so I'm clear, taking the refuse truck as an example we talked about, will that only be included if you have the data for a like for like? So avoiding what Councillor Dorton Gibson's just said, that we're not putting in. So if you've got all the data for an electric vehicle, but not for a petrol diesel vehicle, when that the embedded carbon for an electric vehicle won't go in because you're not creating the net difference. So only items where there is data for what we're choosing above what the alternative would be. Does your amendment cover that?
It's not about the differences between, say, an EV and an ICE engine. It's just about the embedded carbon in all resources that the council is purchasing. So it's not a comparison. It's just the embedded carbon in anything, whether it's a ICE van or a EV van. It'd still be counted if the data's there.
But you'll still need to make the gain from moving to an electric vehicle, though, won't you? So that gets accounted for some, or am I just completely missing what this is trying to achieve?
They're two separate issues. So the gain from going to an EV is included in the scope 1 emissions, whereas I think the purchases of everything is in scope 3. Is that correct?
I think an issue that Councillor Rice raised was that we're increasingly getting these figures, and I also see a danger then that our carbon emissions are going to go up as we get more and more of this data, and they're not going in the right direction at all. This is what I say, the whole thing is a nightmare. You can only, compare your progress if we keep the data the same. As soon as you start changing the data you're looking at, and again, I go back to, do we depreciate it or do we put it through in the year we buy it? And so we buy several vehicles and suddenly our carbon emissions have gone off the scale. We didn't do anything wrong.
And I think we've hit the problem with trying to find out exactly what we are and where our targets are with this. And Lindsay, do you want to come in?
Again, just if it's helpful, I'm wondering whether the proposal, if the wording was more along the lines that the portfolio holder gives consideration to how embedded carbon costs could be appropriately reflected within the dashboard, that might set out your purpose of wanting that reflected, but obviously leave it open for that the difficulties that you're talking through to be explored, because obviously they can't be solved here and now, but you want to flag them up. So that's just a suggestion if it's helpful.
What I want is, wherever possible, anything we buy should have its carbon, embedded carbon displayed on the dashboard. If it's really, really difficult to find it, then okay, don't put it in. But if a lot of things, like Councillor Rice said, a lot of things these days, it's fairly easy to find. I don't think there's any question of putting it in for one type of vehicle or not another type of vehicle, or one type of home and not another type of home, because it's not just vehicles, it's everything. And I know it's a big ask, but we cannot show a nice graph on your very nice dashboard going down if we're not showing the carbon that's being used making the things. It's got to. I just can't see that we can't do it. It's got to be done. So yeah.
Yeah, I do understand where the ask is coming from. I think within this recommendation, we're not specifically saying it should be included anywhere specifically, just have its attention drawn to the fact that this exists and we are aware of its existence, and can we display that somewhere? And it is a recommendation to the portfolio holder to come up with a solution of some sort, or just say, that's a terrible recommendation, no, I'm not doing it. So for expedience and wanting to get on to the next item as well, I'm still happy to second that, and we can move forward with the exact detail around it being left to the portfolio holder to come back with us on that, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, in that case, can I have a show of hands for everyone who's for that, please? And that looks unanimous to me. Okay, on that note, I will say thank you very much to Councillor Hadley and all your team who's come in with you. We really appreciate it, and I think this dashboard is going to give us a lot of thought, and I think this time next year, when we've had more chance to see where this has gone in the previous year and really drill down into it, we should hopefully have a lot more in-depth answers from you. We should have a lot more in-depth questions, and hopefully with it being out to the general public, we should have a lot more public engagement from our local environmental groups and individuals as well. So thanks very much for producing it and bringing this to us today. Really appreciate it. And moving on, and sorry this is slightly delayed, but I think we always know that the Climate Action Annual Report is going to be a big one for this committee, is the Housing Strategy Review. And I'd like to welcome Councillor Wilson, the portfolio holder, and Kelly Dean, who is going to be introducing this report for us. And yeah, once you've got settled, Councillor Wilson, if I can ask you to introduce this for us, please.
Thanks, Chair. Really happy to be here tonight presenting this housing strategy midpoint review and its focus on the updated delivery plan. Good quality housing is fundamental to all of our lives. I firmly believe it's the foundation on which you can build and progress every other aspect of your life, and that's why it's so important to bring it to the board tonight. Challenges across the housing sector have never been starker. Councils across the country are facing the same issues: a lack of supply in both the social housing and private market, a dependency on B&Bs and hotels to help with their temporary accommodation needs, which are bringing some local authorities to the brink of insolvency. Fortunately, we are managing to move away from that, but it is still an issue. The cost of maintaining stock, whilst we welcome much needed regulation, the challenges and demands that brings can't be understated. This is best shown in figures recently produced by the Regulator of Social Housing, which showed that repairs and maintenance across 200 registered providers in 23-24 reached 8.8 billion. That's not million, billion, which was a new record for a third consecutive year. There is also, as Councillor Hadley touched upon in the last item, the need to tackle the climate emergency. And we are moving towards that as a HRA and as a BCP homes. But to really move the dial, it's going to take national intervention due to the staggering costs, which again, Councillor Hadley mentioned in his previous item. There's also difficulties in the construction industry, not only with the inflation of the price of materials, but a shortage of skilled labour. And that's a real cause for concern. In fact, only today I was reading in Inside Housing that the figures for employment in the construction industry are at its lowest since 1998. It has fallen by 20% since 2008, and we have a shortfall as a country of around 250,000 workers. But where there are challenges, there are also opportunities, especially locally, and that is the focus of this plan, working with the tools we have at our disposal to improve housing across our conurbation. Whether that's focusing on working with Homes England on key strategic sites within the conurbation, or bringing forward a working group with multi-sector landlords to share best practice on how to tackle antisocial behaviour. There is so much wide-ranging work in the body of this document, and much of it is already in train. But a delivery plan is pointless if you don't deliver it against it. That is why one of the key parts of this report is the steps we're taking to improve oversight of delivery against this plan. It is proposed that a housing strategy programme is implemented. This board will be chaired by myself as portfolio holder and will report to this board, the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny panel, It is proposed that an annual delivery update is provided to the panel and to Cabinet. We will welcome cross-party representation on that board. I think it's an item that people are very passionate about, and we'd be happy to take open it out to invites and take any interested parties. We want to provide a dashboard of measures similar to the dashboard you had previously. Hopefully, it won't have so many questions and such big debate around it. But it will measure our performance and key performance indicators. In addition to the oversight of the delivery plan, I'd really like the board to support the development of the delivery of a new housing strategy for the period of 27 to 32, which will commence at the end of 2026. The chart within the main body of the report tonight illustrates the full proposed governance structure relating to housing. It includes reference to all overview and scrutiny panels, as housing touches in their scope in most cases. The new programme board is shown, as well as the delivery board to complement it. Hopefully this will bring officers together to ensure that the very complex programme remains on track and that issues are actively tackled. So tonight we're happy to take your questions and your thoughts on where we are with the plan. We have had 2 well-attended, really positive workshops. We've taken on board a lot of members' issues as we've looked to develop this. The work that has gone into this process has been no mean feat. Together with your input and the input of officers' professional knowledge of the sector, against the backdrop of ever-adapting policy changes and some light touches from me, we will hopefully have a plan that I will be proud to present to Cabinet. So happy to open up to questions.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I will say, if you do get a dashboard, I hope the opposite, and it has loads of questions and we can get really involved with it. I have got Councillor Canavan in the room who's asked to speak on this item, so I'll invite him to speak before the committee so that his comments can be entered into the debate as well, and the questions. So, Councillor Canavan, if you want to come and join us.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to preface these remarks by thanking Kelly and her team for all the work they do. Kelly will now be really worried about what I'm going to say next. So I just want to take you back to July of last year, when my group moved the motion which is mentioned in this paperwork. And that was a deliberate attempt by me, to try and influence how the housing strategy was going to play out. And in the paperwork there is some cross-references from the various bits of that motion in relation to the delivery plan that Councillor Wilson's just mentioned. I have to say, Chair, that I am considerably disappointed by that, because a lot of it is, well, let's just wait and see. Let's wait and see what the government says. This is all too difficult. We need more time. And I said I can't remember whether it was in that debate or in another debate, that I am going to continue to push this administration to do stuff, to move this agenda forward, and not to keep writing endless strategies and plans. We need delivery and we need action. So that's what I see my job as, to try and push this agenda forward. So there is a section in the report which outlines the national context, and has been mentioned. This is a significant area where there is a lot of change. And I've said this before, but the direction of travel from this government is absolutely clear. And if people are not recognising that, then they're not listening. So we can't just wait, in my view, for the government to pass, things like the Renters' Rights Bill, the Rent Reform Bill. We can't just wait for that. We need to be getting on and doing that work now. One of the issues that we also raised was around things like the Section 21 and the Tenants Charter. And again, what this paper says is, well, we have to wait and see. And I just find that really frustrating. And I'm sure people will not be surprised that I'm frustrated, because that's kind of a permanent state of being. But the other issue which really concerns me is about discretionary licensing. I mean, I don't know how many times I have to say this, but we need to do this work. And the talk in this paper about options appraised and options appraised, I'm not sure what options we're considering. We know we have to do it. We know we have to tackle the issue of rogue landlords, tackle the issue of Section 21 eviction, tackle the issue of unsatisfactory conditions in the private rented sector. So I know that work is ongoing about conditions survey, and that's really welcome. But that work needs to be gone at pace, and I do get frustrated by the pace that is suggested in this report. So, in terms of the recommendations, Chair, I mean, that's just my frustration, that I just don't think this report goes far enough, and I just don't think it goes fast enough. But the particular recommendation that I did want to speak about was the recommendation C, which is about governance. It is several months ago now, at least 6 months ago now, that I suggested the creation of a housing advisory group to be constructed on the same basis as the transport advisory group, which was created, on the basis that this would be able to bring together all aspects of housing, because that was my frustration at that point, where I felt bits of housing issues were going to the Overview and Scrutiny Board, bits of it were coming here, bits of it would come to health and adult social care, when I could actually convince people that we actually had had some interest in this, and it was intended to be a way in which we could bring all the strands of housing together, including what I consider to be a completely joined up planning service in relation to housing. So that was the intention. So what we have in this paper is a suggestion about a steering group that should report to this environment and place overview and scrutiny. In my view, that's considerably weaker than what I suggested back then, and it I think deliberately contains it within scrutiny. And what I read from that is that this administration is not interested in collaborative policy development. There are lots of ideas out there, but yet the administration want to keep control of that policy. So that's my considerable criticism of that recommendation. The other thing that really I find really difficult is there's just this passing reference to health in this report, and I find that disappointing. I think everybody recognises that housing and poor housing conditions are a key determinant of health. Yet we keep going around in circles that we can't look at housing health in relation to housing and their interrelationship, and that's really one of the reasons why I wanted to create that housing advisory group also, so that we could actually bring that into the debate. So the other thing that I think worries me a bit about this idea of a steering group is the composition of it. Councillor Wilson's talked about cross-party. I don't know what that means. He says he's going to put out invitations. Just because I'm like this, I'll just say it as I feel it. If that means he's going to decide which of my group sits on that committee, he can think again, because that's not happening. We will determine, I will determine, my group will determine which of my members sit on that steering group. So we're not going to go through a process of this administration handing out invitations and them deciding who sits on that committee. Nor will this Overview and Scrutiny Committee do it either. So that's just not acceptable from my point of view. So I hope I've made those points clear, Chair. This isn't a criticism, it's a sense of frustration that we're not doing enough, and we're not doing enough quickly. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond directly to that. While it got a little bit political in that, which is a slight change from how we usually try and keep this overview and scrutiny committee. So if you want to respond directly, and then we'll move on to the debate with the committee members present. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think there's obviously a lot there. From my perspective, I don't think we are waiting. I think this action plan actually does the opposite. I think a lot of the deadlines you'll see in there are kind of for this year. In terms of the actions we're bringing forward. Yes, that there are certain things we're having to wait on because there's so much change in the sector. There's so much change in regulation. There's so many factors that are undecided. So if we were to try and just go ahead and implement something and then government says, no, actually we're taking the opposite direction, you know, we are absolutely going ahead with so much work. And to be honest, with that assessment, it feels like you haven't read the action plan, to be honest, because there is so much we're doing within that. In terms of discretionary licensing, either selective or additional, this is obviously something that's a key driver for the Labour group and the council concerned. You know, we're having regular meetings with the MP regarding regulation in the private rented sector, but there's a lot that we have to go through in terms of trying to bring that forward. You know, it is really important we do a housing sort of condition survey to understand where we are. It's also, again, understanding the market. Right now, the biggest factor for homelessness is evictions from the private rented sector, Section 21s. Now, hopefully, when it eventually comes in, the Renters' Rights Bill will bring an end to that. We don't know. But certainly with that already coming down the line, bringing in additional or selective licensing on top of that is a potential nightmare for private landlords and will potentially create an increase in homelessness demand. So we have to tread carefully with that, and we are going through that process with the MP on monthly meetings. So again, something that we are doing. Governance, again, this is something that I can't be any clearer. It's cross-party. I'm inviting members, any member across the council, to get in touch if they want to be part of the board. So I'm not choosing, you know, if the Labour Party want to put whoever they want to put forward, they can, they're more than welcome to. Obviously, if we have 76 councillors come forward, and hopefully we will, then probably I'll have a choice to make in terms of who's going to be on the board, because it's unrealistic to have a full council meeting about these things every quarter. But yeah, I mean, for me, again, the governance, I think it's a really positive step, this governance, actually trying to focus housing into one place through one scrutiny panel, and actually putting a focus both for members and for officers, you know. So below this is the programme board that's going to focus officers' mind. They're going to have monthly meetings in order to stay on track, in order to create agendas for the steering group. So again, don't really see where we're going with that. Yeah, I think I've answered pretty much everything. Happy to open up to debate. But I do thank the councillor for his passion and his tenacity in these issues.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's a good response to what we've just heard. And I just want to be very clear as well, when it came to the suggestion that working groups from here, we are picking and choosing who members are. This committee has always invited members to volunteer to be members of working groups or any committees which we put forward, and that invite has at times extended beyond this committee to all councillors, directly to group leaders, asking them to put forward any members. If those group leaders have not responded by the deadlines which we put in place to do that, that is not this committee not reaching out. That is an opportunity which has been missed by any groups or independent members. So I just want to be very clear on how we're setting up our working groups from this committee. On that note, if we can move it onto the full debate, Kelly, I know you've got some things that you'll probably want to say, but if we can save it in the debate, that would be great. I will go first, if that's okay, and use chair's privilege. The one thing which has really stuck out to me in this is the recommendation that the extension of this housing strategy period goes to 2027, which is a 12-month extension on when it was. Given that this was set up in 2021, that is quite a significant increase, and 2021 was quite a while ago as well. I don't think that this strategy is as ambitious as it should have been and as it could have been. So why delay in setting a new strategy up which can have much clearer ambition for the future strategy of housing in BCP?
I mean, I think it's because of the process that it's taken. So to go through this has been a long time. We've had to push this back and back in order to do detailed work in bringing this action plan forward, and that's taken its own time. I think as well, in terms of it lays the foundation. So we've managed to do a lot of work and improve on the housing strategy. I agree with you. I don't think that the original housing strategy probably was ambitious enough, but I feel like this action plan does add a level of ambition, despite what the councillors might think. And again, I think the governance that we're proposing to bring in, it allows a good period of time, a 2-year period, to work on the next housing strategy. So working with members, going really in depth into issues and areas which they find important. I think yeah, I'm happy with the approach personally.
Kelly.
Thank you. Just to pick up on those points, I do accept all the points that have been raised, and actually when you think about the timing of the housing strategy, both the housing strategy and the homelessness strategy were completed in 2021. We were still tackling COVID, and you know that there were some unique challenges at that time. I agree that I don't think the housing strategy as it stands is ambitious enough, but one of the things that we've tried to do here is to make sure that the work that we need to do to fully understand our housing need, our financial strategies, our ability to take that vision and those ambitions further is understood. And so that's why you'll see a lot, especially in this first year, an awful lot that really looks to unpick and understand specialist housing needs assessments, leading into strategic pieces of work that will set plans. And actually we need time and capacity within the service to be able to deliver that, whilst actually completely reviewing a homelessness strategy that has to be by statute redone every 5 years, and developing a new housing strategy that does have that level of ambition, which involves a significant amount of consultation. So it really is just about the practical reality of actually moving to a place where we do have a much more ambitious vision, and we raise those expectations up, but at the same time really consolidating, focusing on our key areas and making sure that we're delivering some priorities in the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you. I'll go on to Councillor Rice, who I've got next on the list.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to go back to the steering group. I think it was it is useful to have more clarification on the membership of that group. Obviously, we have lots of different types of groups, but it would be useful to hear from Kieran if he gets 10 members coming forwards. Like, what sort of size of group is he envisaging? 5 or 20? And are you not planning on having it politically balanced, like formally politically balanced? Because you're hoping there'll just be enthusiastic councillors that come forwards.
Councillor Wilson?
Spot on, Councillor Rice. That's exactly what I want. I don't see this. I mean, there is a political element to it. Clearly, we've seen that tonight. But I don't see housing as a generally political issue. I think it's a problem that needs solving. You know, the issues that we have. So I just want to see interested, passionate members coming forward. My ideal probably group would be around 7, I guess, members. You know, in terms of the debate being able to be kept moving, and you know. The group being able to, you know, maintain membership, etc., etc. Because I think when you get above that number, you do tend to have a number of members not being able to attend all of them, etc., etc. But you know, if there were 10 and they were all, you know, very, very keen to join, then I don't see why that would be an issue. Again, we're planning to have terms of reference. we're looking at meeting quarterly. And yeah, I think it's a really positive step forward. Yeah.
And when are you planning on sending out the invitation for people to put forward members?
So this paper is going to Cabinet in April, and then as soon as it's passed, we'll put out the invitation.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and otherwise, thank you for all of the work in this.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Doughton-Gibson.
Yes, I also had a question about the group. I use the word obviously, I would be interested in joining, but it does also then create the question about whether anybody on E&P should be on it. And I just wondered if you'd thought about that.
To be honest, I haven't put much thought in it. I don't see why that would be an issue. If anything, it's probably useful for when it does come to the annual thing that you had an insight into how the working group and the steering group worked, and you could probably offer improvements potentially. So I wouldn't see it necessarily as a problem. I suppose that's a discussion for you as a panel to decide if you want to recuse yourself. But from my perspective, I don't see it as an issue.
Thank you. The second one is on page 73, which is in the table where we've got 1.10, and we says the existing arrangements in order to make empty homes become available more quickly. I'm not sure whether we're talking here about empty homes as in EDMOs, empty dwelling management orders, or whether we're talking about council houses where a tenant's left and it takes us a length of time before we can get the next tenant in there. I'm aware from my work with the seascape side that it actually takes a surprisingly long time for us to get those done, and I just wondered which that was referencing to.
I mean, obviously it wasn't our motion that we brought forward. However, I've taken it to assume all properties. However, I suppose the focus is on long-term empty properties. However, we do also have a focus on trying to get our properties turned around, our void properties turned around, both within the HRA and Seascape. Generally, in the housing sector, the time taken to get voids turned around has been increasing due to some of the challenges I mentioned in my opening in terms of repairs and maintenance. However, there are also just some issues and teething problems that we've had within our housing options team that we were trying to smooth out and work through. So it is, I'm taking it as both, because at the end of the day, both need solving and both help to reduce and relieve people's homelessness. But also in terms of the empty homes, we are again looking to bring forward another plan for that. That potentially will have resource behind it as well in terms of empty homes officers. That's up for discussion, something that we're working through, but watch this space. I think from my perspective, I want to go away and look at where other councils are doing it well. I know Aberdeen particularly up in Scotland have been doing some work on bringing empty homes back into use, and that's somewhere where I want to understand why and how they managed to do that. But yeah, for me, I think I encompass all of it.
Specifically on that, thinking of the void, do you know what our average number of void days are and how many we have at a time? It just struck me this might be one, your chance to get your own dashboard in.
Yeah. Oh, we definitely. I mean, we definitely do have that data.
We have a dashboard.
We have a dashboard. It's presented to the advisory, the BCP Homes Advisory Board, which has two other members from the Labour Party. 58.5 days. is the current time. But yeah, like I was saying, it does have a dashboard that's presented to the BCP Homes Advisory Board. We have done some work to get those papers onto Modern Gov, so I think you can actually subscribe to that board and committee now and go and look at those papers yourself. That's again something that we're trying to be open, transparent, and allow other members access, those who aren't on the board. So yeah, I think you had a comment you wanted to make on the previous part of the question.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. Just on empty homes, yes, so we're about 58.5 days. About 58.5 is incredible. But the average across the social housing sector at the moment stands at about 50. Our target is 35. So and we've really struggled. It's fair to say we have struggled to get that to where it needs to be. We have though now got a new voids contractor who is, you know, we're still in this process of harmonising everything across BCP homes. So where we had a Bournemouth way of doing things and a Poole way of doing things, we're still harmonising. That is now harmonised. We have the same standard for all of our voids. That is creating some savings for us in the budget. But it is still a challenge for us in terms of the void timescales. We have quite an impressive dashboard. I don't think even Kieran's seen this yet, but we are looking at a key-to-key, end-to-end process so that we can really understand where the issues are. And I can tell you those issues have improved on the void turnaround period, but there probably now are some issues in relation to our nomination timescales and how long it takes us to nominate people through to the properties. And then, of course, people refuse properties. And because we have quite a considerable number of our nominations going to homeless households at the moment, that does add additional complexity in terms of the turnover and the timescale and order of events. But it's an absolute focus. It is for the advisory board. It is for us from a management perspective on BCP homes. And that's why I can tell you it's 58.5.
I'm very impressed, you know, the figure. The reason is, I mean, you know, I've worked in the PRS rented houses for 40 years, and, you know, if you had it empty for more than 2 or 3 days, you're horrified. You know, the demand, and you know, every time we say, it's a certain irony what you've just said, if you think about it, that one of the reasons it's causing delays is the homeless people. I mean, the more the delays, the more we get homeless people, you know, so it's sort of counterintuitive. I'm just really keen that we look at what we can do to get it down, because, you know, we've got this resource. We were talking earlier about embedded carbon. Well, here's another resource we've got that's sitting there, and yet we're spending millions, or more were spending millions in B&B and things, which is not good for people and it's not good for our budget. So I'm just very keen that we focus on that and try and get those numbers down. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers at the moment? Councillor Northover.
Just on the empty homes, I was just looking at where it's all red for empty homes, and just thinking about over like the last 15-20 years that I've been involved in various things, we've tried so many times to do that work on empty homes, and it just seems to always come back as actually not as straight. It's not the big win that we always think it is, and it's like we've done that a few times, and I wonder if we're better off just concentrating on those 58.5 days, because that's something really in our control, whereas those empty homes seem like something that we can pick off, but they belong to other people, and it's so much effort just to do one, and we've got these ones. I just feel like the focus should just be sorting ourselves out, really.
Thank you for
You
that.
don't have to answer.
No.
Comment.
No, happy to answer. I think that's a really fair comment, and I would absolutely agree with you in many ways, because they can be very complex cases to get empty homes back in. You have to, you know, find the owner. Sometimes they've been left it, you know, in a will. They're in New Zealand. You can't get hold of them. There's loads of different factors in trying to track them down, and then convincing them to sell it, go through that process, etc., etc. However, what I would say is that's why it's up for discussion, and why I want to understand best practice elsewhere and understand how they're managing to get the results they are. I think previously we did have an officer, but they were like not even a full-time equivalent. It was half an officer who used to work on this, so they would split their time amongst 2 directorates, and so it's difficult to actually judge if it was working, you know, because if you're only putting half the effort into it, half the resource into it, it's difficult to establish that. So, like I say, I want to go away, look at where's doing it well, assess whether it's worth it, because again, just going back to the kind of financial viability of it, I guess, if we manage to get 3 or 4 or 5 empty properties back into use per year, and that's taking away from our B&B costs, then the full-time officer pays for themselves. So yeah, I think for me, it's again going away, assessing it, and coming back.
Kelly.
Thank you. Just to expand on that, you can absolutely be assured that voids in our own stock is a priority. Absolute given. You know, we do. It is a challenge across the sector, and you know, why is that so different in the private rented sector? Is it, you know, these are the things that we need to understand, but we are working that through, and we've made some really significant improvements. In terms of empties, you're completely right. It's a really big challenge. When we did have an empty homes officer previously, you know, it was helpful from the point of view of identifying what the issues were, but it's a casework heavy and intensive piece of resource that doesn't always bring big results. As Kieran said though, you know, actually 5 or 6 properties brought into use a year, probably we can justify the cost of that officer. What we need that's different, and what other local authorities are doing, is a different approach to a sort of front end informal approach, like we would do with any other enforcement activity. Actually, you know, where you would use the kind of 80-20 rule, you'd have, you know, setting out the expectations and being clear about what's required, supporting the bringing back into use. But ultimately, if, for example, properties creating issues in a community, if we've served notices on that property, there are enforced sale options, and you know, we want to explore through the steering group as well, you know, the political appetite and our appetite across the council for a more decisive approach. Because ultimately there are, you know, a considerable number of properties empty. They do create issues in our community. We respond to those within our environmental protection services at the moment. But actually, what does that proactive approach achieve when it's got a bit more teeth than we've used previously?
Can I just swing this slightly, or no one else wants to, onto one of my pet peeves, and it is tangentially empty homes. And to me, an empty home is a home which isn't housing someone local or a family, and that's things like Airbnbs. Particularly, one thing that really frustrates me is, since the original strategy was put in place, the explosion of Airbnbs going from staying in someone's spare room for a night or two to this being corporates buying blocks of flats to rent them all out as Airbnbs. And what we can do and what the strategy can be look like to avoid this being the case, particularly somewhere as attractive as BCP, where people want to come down and stay by the seaside, and it doesn't just impact on house prices and homes, it impacts on hotels and businesses in the area as well. And one thing that I saw recently that was related to this, and I can't remember the place now, but I think it was somewhere in North Wales, changed their planning, I imagine through an SPD, to regulate that an Airbnb was a planning change of use from a home, and it saw the house prices fall over the last 12 months of 7%, something like that locally, because of the amount of people trying to sell up, because now it's less viable for them to run it as business. So I know in this you've got further exploration of the issues around defining exactly how it is, but it'd be really good to see what the plan's going to look like and how we're going to tackle what is a growing issue, preventing local people being able to transition from rented accommodation into buying their own first home, for example.
I think obviously there's a key point for us at the moment is understanding what that looks like. We know that there's certain legislation that we can use already within the enforcement world that allows us to deal with some of the issues, for example, nuisance, you know, those sorts of problems. But there's very limited powers for the local authority in this regard, and we're obviously waiting for you know, for a conversation and discussion and debate and some determination from the government in terms of how they might deal with that. So for us, there is a point about lobbying, and there's quite a few points actually around lobbying. We have a list, given the really positive MP engagement that we have at the moment, and this is one of those factors. So I think from my perspective, it is part of that. You know, the first step that we need to take in terms of empty homes, and the reason that is so glowing crimson is because we haven't had the resource. I mean, if we have a resource, then part of the first part of the role will be about really understanding what's there, what does it look like, how many of these properties are used as second, empty homes or Airbnbs, and actually understanding what the kind of position is and how that impacts the market in BCP, so that then we can go to we can do that lobbying from a position of better influence, because we have better facts. I'm not aware of the planning option. Sounds interesting. Really happy to take that away and have a conversation with Wendy Lane, Director of Planning, and see what the options are there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking of taking myself on a holiday there to go and find out and see what they did. Councillor
On an
Wright.
Airbnb though?
Not an Airbnb, of course not. I'll take my van. Councillor Rice. Councillor Rice, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
great.
I was just sneezing. Yes. Oh, sorry. My question relates in general to the wealth inequality between generations that were able to buy a property. Maybe my generation and older, with sort of a relatively low proportion of their annual income in comparison to the cost of housing now and its relative cost to incomes being very unaffordable, and the inequality that arises from that. It's not a qualified inequality, so it's not showing up on your EIA, I don't think. But I would like to see this being raised as an issue. But also, what is the overall expectation or hope with the plan? I'm always very frustrated when I see more homes for sort of the principle of building more homes and not ensuring that there's social rent, for me, doesn't resolve the issue of the wealth inequality. Just building more homes, as Chris has already raised, in terms of Airbnb being an issue, we're a tourist area, but also people being able to work from home and moving out of London, and just I've noticed that there was a drop in the allocation for affordable housing in the Poole Town Centre, I think, in Bournemouth Town Centre, but even affordable housing isn't that useful. Basically, I just want to see what your feelings are on trying to lobby about ensuring that we are building a higher proportion of social housing as opposed to just building any houses.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Firstly, your point around the equalities issue, I'm happy to take that away and see if that can be incorporated in. With regards to social housing, I'm a massive fan. Obviously, I think it's essential. I think we should be building more as a country. Unfortunately, it's really difficult in terms of the viability. And you have to as well ask the question around if we can build to affordable and we cap it at local housing allowance and we can build more. Is that worth sacrificing some social rents? That's some decision we sometimes have to make. But equally, we are always trying to advocate for social rent where we can. I think there's a piece for us around, again, and it does come back to, a lot of this comes back to national government, of course it does, about lobbying national government. I think this Labour government are amenable to social rent. I think Homes England are, and it's about opening up those conversations with them. But yeah, really, really supportive of social rent. I've lived in the same social rented house my whole life, and so it was a big part of my childhood, having that security of a social rented property. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, earlier on you mentioned about, I don't know, you were saying talking to the MP. I'm just wondering, is there a specific MP who you've been liaising with a lot on this, or is it all the MPs? I was just wondering because I'm not sure if you're just saying VMP meaning all the MPs or.
I've been talking to a couple of MPs. I am. The main MP that I've been talking to is Tom Hayes. He's been the one who's wanted regular meetings, but also having conversations with Jessica Toll. Always open to other MPs getting in touch and discussing these issues because they're important for the whole conurbation and the area and the residents that they serve.
Yeah, Ken.
Just if I may add to that, there's a regular officer group that's meeting with which all the MPs are invited to. It's really well attended, much better attended than it has been in the past. And housing comes up as a really constant topic, as you can imagine. There's a lot of work happening in terms of briefing and a lot of really helpful discussion in those meetings where the MPs are asking us how can they help. What do we need from them? And the relationship feels very positive from an officer perspective. So that regular engagement happens, and it's representatives of officers across the whole council, not necessarily just housing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say from a member perspective as well, they're very engaged. They understand the issues, and I think they want to work with the council, not against the council. So that's really positive.
Just another. Sorry to come back to the steering group again, because I know maybe you don't want to give like a definitive answer. I'm just sort of concerned because we're talking about something that in your eyes is going to be like a real driver. There's been a bit of debate about the ambitiousness and all the rest, and it feels like that would be a driver of trying to pull out the bits and pieces and like we're just talking about like empty homes and all these opportunities for where there can be more discussion, which obviously gets overseen here, but then it does feel like then it needs to be quite prescriptive about who will sit on that or the application process. So for instance, if you're saying 7 to 10 is like the ideal number, I think it just the political reality is outside of an apolitical scrutiny group is that the groups will arrange amongst themselves about how to go forward with that. But if other people come forward as well, I mean, say you get 20 names, will you just pick, how do you get to the 10 names out of the 20, considering the importance that's being given to this group? I just sort of want to make sure that, like, if one group puts forward one name, thinking that's the kind of situation we're in, and another group puts forward 5 names, and that's the extent of it, and then suddenly there's 7 people on this group. I know you'll say you're anticipating that more people will be interested in this across hopefully so, hopefully 76 people come forward, but just how do you actually deal with that to get to something that reflects its importance or the importance that you're giving that group?
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I think that's something to be worked through. Again, this is a draft paper, so you're seeing this very early on. It still has to go to April's cabinet. That's something that we need to work through. If 20 councillors, I mean, it'd be fantastic to have that problem. That's a great problem to have, 20 councillors wanting to talk about housing. And so we'll cross that bridge when we come to it to a degree. But at the end of the day, it's about trying to find passionate people who are going to attend and bring the right attitude as well. I think that's really key, because again, I think you need to leave the politics at the door for this steering group, if I'm being honest, because housing's about getting solved and not about politics. So for me, happy to work through that and have an answer for you at the next cabinet meeting that it comes forward in.
I'm sensing there's a lot of interest in this steering group and exactly what it's going to look like. So this isn't a question for you two, this is a question for this committee. Do we want to make a recommendation on what we think this steering group should look like? There's been a lot of talk about how are the members chosen, how that we are in a position where we could make a recommendation. on how we wanted that to be formed, whether we wanted it to be informally politically balanced, not make up the political balance, but done in the same sort of way, or if we want it to be open to those members most passionate, if we want it to be done through group leaders nominating members, it's the options are open to us. So if anyone wanted to put forward something, they're welcome to. Councillor Wilson.
I think that's a fantastic idea. Thank you.
Don't flatter me. Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I think it should be politically balanced. It just removes any suggestion of anything else. Make it politically balanced, and it's got the real potential to get political, hasn't it? So it should really be balanced.
Any other speakers on that? Councillor Northover?
Do you mind if I just ask? Do you mean like politically balanced like this, or this committee, where it's based on the votes of?
Yeah, I haven't thought about it too deeply.
Or do you mean representative from each group? Because if it's a representative from each group, like my group has 2 people in it, whereas yours has.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't thought too deeply about it, but I think there should be some sort of balance.
Yeah, I think on others we've had a representative from each group. That works quite well often, but it's not technically politically balanced.
I'm open to hear recommendations from anyone. If you wanted to recommend that it's a member from each group plus an independent member, I don't know. Like, do you want to raise that?
I recommend that it's a representative from each group plus an independent.
That sounds good to me. Okay. Does anyone want to second that? Councillor Doughton Gibson to second, and Councillor Clements as well. But is there any debate on that at all? In that case, can I just go straight to asking for a vote straight away on that? That we want to see it politically balanced. By politically balanced we mean a member from. I don't think we can use politically balanced. I think we've got to use a member from each group plus an independent member. Lindsay, you might want to correct me slightly.
Just very slightly, Chair. I think what you're talking about is a cross-party working group membership, and also when you talk about an independent member, I think you're talking about those members who are unaligned to political groups, because those are different from the independent membership grouping within the council. So just to be really clear on that, it's unaligned members that I think the councillor is intending.
Thank you for correcting my phrasing. Yes. Councillor Rice, did I see your hand go up?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear that, with the with the politically balanced group, then it would mean that there was only one member from the Conservative Party, whereas if it was politically balanced, there would be 2, and the same would be relevant for the Labour group, and the Lib Dems would, if there was a group of 10, then there would be 3 Lib Dems. So it was just to make sure that everybody was aware of that difference. Obviously, then Lisa wouldn't be invited into it. This is just going on the recent politically balanced community governance group. So it was just so that everybody understood. I don't really mind either way.
Okay, thank you. So the current recommendation is a member from each political group plus an unaligned member. And are we happy to have a show of hands in favour of that? And that's unanimous. Great, thank you. Is there any further debate on the rest of this paper? I am happy to welcome you to come and say something, Councillor Cooper. Could you sit down and use a microphone, please?
Okay, sorry. Yes, thank you for the report on housing. It's good. Patrick said his bit, but this was about within the motion that we put together. I kind of wrote it, and we asked for a deregulation of the Airbnbs, which we've mentioned and skimmed across, which I think to regulate them, not deregulate them. And I think it's crucial for the future of the strategy to work, because they are growing. just to remind you that when we were campaigning, I expect all of us felt this, that in an area like Beta Park, there was an area where you could swing a cat around in, and there was about 14 empty houses, and the neighbours were saying that most of them were Airbnbs, and I think we need to come down on it. And I just wonder, like when we have a motion and we pass it, and it was passed unanimously, that work on making sure that the elements that are important go into individual work streams, and I don't think we should lose the regulation of Airbnbs. So I just thought I'd like to say that. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you very much for that. I think. Sorry. Yeah, go on.
It's probably quite naive. Is there anything that can be done? Obviously, we've got a lot of sites around that are empty. I was stood on top of the multi-storey car park on the Dolphin the other day, and I could see Carter's Quay, I could see the railway sidings, this is your area, the Barclays houses, the Fortudo in Wimborne, in the old High Street, and then the bit we sold off that used to be opposite the bus station. And they're all waiting to be built on and converted and stuff like that. Is there time limits that can be given that they've got to be, because a lot of them they're not ours, they're private developers. Is there anything that can be done with time limits that they've got to start building? You've got to do something with these sites. You can't just sit on them. Like I say, I don't know very much about planning or anything like that. So I just wondered if there was anything that can be done around that. It's just they seem nothing's getting done, you know.
I think it probably is more of a question for planning, I have to confess, but so there's a 5-year requirement to implement a planning permission. Yeah, so that is there, and of course, you know, we have Amina Matin as our Director of Investment and Development, who's doing an awful lot of work alongside Wendy as the Director of Planning to think about obviously how we meet our growth targets, how we and obviously growth is a priority in the housing strategy, and you can see some of the focus that we're trying to bring to that. But certainly, I think that it's probably a point around the future strategy and the level of ambition and what we can achieve across BCP. But the reality of a lot of the challenges is that the viability of sites is so incredibly difficult, and we're seeing that in the affordable housing sector as much as we are in the private sector as well. So yeah, it's probably more of a question for planning. We can come back with a bit more detail if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I can't see any other hands, that we'll leave this paper there. Thank you very much for bringing that into us. The only thing I'd like to really add is that when that once this has been to Cabinet, and assuming it will be approved at Cabinet, that steering group is formed as quickly as possible. And ideally, we'd love to have that come back in maybe a year today to this same meeting now and make it again a climate housing double header, because I think it's been a really good debate and we've got a lot there, and hopefully we can see the results of what that group's going to bring this time next year. So thank you again for coming in. Sorry, I was just confirming that the recommendation we've made will be to Cabinet, not to use the portfolio holder, so it'll go when it goes to Cabinet.
That's a shame. I was going to accept it straight away.
You can accept it there. On that note, I think we can just take a quick 5-minute comfort break, because this has gone on a little bit, and we'll come back and do the last couple of items in the work plan. Thank you, everyone.
live again.
Hello and welcome back to the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We are going to move on to the final item, which is the work plan, and also incorporating item 6, which is the recommendations from portfolio holders, Cabinet and Council. And Lindsay, I think you're just going to talk us through the process of how we determine these scrutiny requests whilst we've become full council's favourite place to start sending all the items to. So if you could give us a bit of an intro, please, that'd be great.
I will, Chair, and you're right. You will have noticed that you are increasingly getting recommendations coming through from council. So that's why I want to really clarify the process for you. So you've agreed that you're going to look at your work plan, including item 6 that's on your agenda. So if I take you back to item 6, that's page 11 in your pack. This report sets out 2 recommendations from council and 1 from a portfolio holder for you to undertake some work. There's just a very slightly different process when you're considering these types of requests from council, cabinet or portfolio holders. If you agree to proceed with the work, then you're asked to report back to the relevant body on your findings. If you don't want to proceed with the work that's requested, you have to go back to them with reasons, and that's different from a normal scrutiny request to you. So that's why those are set out in a separate report. But as ever with any scrutiny requests, the Constitution asks you to assess what impact you can have with the suggested items, and not only the impact, but assure yourselves that the value you can bring from the work makes it an appropriate priority for your work plan. You should assess the background to the issue proposed, the proposed scrutiny process and timescales, and then set this against the resources you've got available in your work plan. And a reminder in that sense that you're allowed 1 working group at a time per ONS committee. In terms of the 3 requests set out in item 6, in some cases you haven't been given a clear direction on exactly what the scope or the scrutiny process proposed is. Some of it's a more general request to you as a committee. So if you do agree to the requests, just to be really clear that as a committee, it's within your gift to determine how you proceed with those requests, what sort of scope you would take. And tonight, as we take you through them, you can either agree to them in principle, going onto your work plan, and then delegate perhaps to the chair and vice chair to take that forward and bring back a more detailed scope proposal. Or as you go through, if the committee has ideas on the scope and the timescales so that they want to agree at this point, then you could do that. So shall I just start working through, Chair, with the first one, which is van life. That is a council proposal to you that you establish a community pact for all vehicle dwellers. And council specifically just said to you that you consider the detail of this pact as a committee. We've done some background work just to establish exactly what was intended through that motion at council, and I think it was intended that you actually do that early development work of that policy, of writing that pact. I think that was the intention, but looking back at debate at council, there was also the suggestion that you might be better placed rather to gather an evidence base from stakeholders to underpin what the detail of that policy would be rather than actually doing the writing of it. So again, that's where I say that that's for you to determine. Councillor Cooper was the councillor who proposed this at council. He has since provided us with some extra information on themes that could be explored in the work and the value that could be brought by these, and some potential stakeholders to speak to. And I know that Councillor Cooper is here tonight, so I don't know if you want to bring him in to say anything around his proposal on that one.
Thanks, Lindsay. And yeah, you're exactly right. We have got Councillor Cooper here. So I can go straight to you, Councillor Cooper, if you want to introduce this to us and just say a few words about it.
Thank you. And I'm a newbie to this, so kind of bear with me. I mean, basically, the motion was put forward based on a cross conurbation identified problem, but in particular, the issues that we face in the ward of Hamworthy, really, and particularly around Lake Pier. Plus, one of our other councillors has been working with travellers and van lifers in the Bournemouth and Boscombe area. and he passed those over to me. So in terms of trying to address an issue of that community conflict, community cohesion, the duality of a use of space between an unexpected use of a space. In other words, if you take Lake Pier, people want to go down there, have a bag of chips, they want to sit and look at the view. People have been doing that for as long as the pier has been there, really, kind of. And then the emergence of people, either by choice or by economic necessity, are choosing Hobson's choice to live in a van. We don't have a policy, or we don't accept that, and we don't actually realise that this is a growing and emerging issue linked to the housing emergency that's in this country, plus the economic position of people. You know, the pounds in their pocket are not going further. I've worked with a couple down at Hamworthy, at Lake Pier. It seems unbelievable, this, in this day and age. He's a porter, she's a nurse. When the economy crashed, and I'm not going to mention any politics here, it crashed. They couldn't afford to pay their mortgage, so they decided to sell their mortgage, and they've got quite a nice van, and they move around and they live in it. They even hang their clothes on the outside of the van to take the creases out of it. And this is the sort of story you get right up the country. And I kind of think that we can be a leader in this. I mean, Bath have got a really good policy. Really, really good policy. It has its problems, but they've acknowledged it as a situation that is not going to go away. They've acknowledged that it's about lifestyle choice, and well, I'm not going over old ground, that it is a situation we need to get to grips with. And some of the things on the paper are, we can improve, the cohesive nature of our communities. We can look at the balanced use of public spaces. Tell me to shut up if I'm going to go on, because I will go on. We'll have the enhanced support for van dwellers, because they have not got any. And that's where the links with Cushty Bock, the Gypsy Traveller organisation that Patrick and I have got good relationships with. They supported this motion, they supported the idea of it. We went and sat and said this is going to be really good, not just for the van, but also we're working with a group. One group's got protected characteristics. I will shoot around like a pinball on this. So the Gypsies and Travellers, rightly so, have got protected characteristics, but van lifers have not got any. They're kind of in limbo in terms of where they belong in this community that we kind of live on. So I think we can be brave to enhance our support for those. We can inform our policy kind of decisions going forward to how we grasp situations that are causing difficult situations in our communities, and it's right across the conurbation. Environmental protection is really important. Some of the issues down Lake Pier have caused a lot of trouble, and it's only, I hate that phrase, oh, you've always got one bad apple, I hate it. But it's the kind of thing, you get a group of 10 vans together, and there's probably one in there that will go and trample on the heath, or will defecate in the hedge, or will lose their grey water will be poured somewhere else. Yet if we have services that enabled them to get rid of stuff like that, providing services, and we'd have to work out the financial implications. In Bath, what they've done sometimes is allocated spaces. They've got tiered pricing, so if people can afford, some of them can afford to pay. So that's an income generation to keep toilets open, or litter collection, stuff like that.
Can I ask you to start summing up?
Yeah, well, to sum up, right, I think that we need to do something, and we need to do it by fleet of foot, and we need to be bold, and we need to be brave, and we need to get some sort of policy direction, and work out how we're going to do that, and what are the implications that is going to be for financial implications and for policy implications. So I'm asking you to consider it, give a considered response, look at the motion, hopefully you've read it, and the supporting document, and we're looking to support that and form a couple of people's focus groups as well from the two communities that I've spoken about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and thanks for bringing it as well. It's something quite close, personal to me. I've got a lot of friends who have lived in vans, do live in vans, have transitioned in vans, serious things, and know a lot of people in that community as well. So I think it's a really good motion for us at the right time. So our decision, if it is what Lindsay outlined before, we can choose to add this to our work plan and just leave it at that and delegate to look at how we tackle it in a future time. We can add it and prioritise it and fit it in. We can choose what kind of scrutiny we want to do on it or not at this point. So there's multiple options open to us. So I will open it to the committee if anyone's got any suggestions or any questions even for Councillor Cooper. Councillor Martin.
So, I suppose a question for Councillor Cooper then, in terms of the background work that you've done there, and then with Kushti Bok, I know you've just, are you specific in how you think this committee could address it best, in terms of just, not as a direction, but just as an aspiration?
Yeah, I think the aspiration is that we acknowledge the situation, we accept what the situation is, and then we work together to make a creative policy decision which has long-term impact and is sustainable. And in that process, we develop forums. You know, this is an aspiration, but it's participation, engagement with the people. So Kushti Bok are on board. There's a couple of van lifers down at Lake Pier that are on board. Chap called Wayne in Bournemouth, who we've got a connection with. They're ready to talk to us, right? And I've kind of met them on the road, as it were. And we need to look how we can grow that and get their voices heard. Because once we get people on board, then they will become our partners in tackling some of those situations that we might class as antisocial behaviour or are not protecting the environment, or there's people who don't really care about others when they're moving about in the communities that we live in. So social cohesion, environmental protection, and participation engagement, and a social policy that has impact and longevity. That's where I'm at with it.
Thank you very much. I've actually got a suggestion myself for this piece of work of how I think would be best to proceed to it. I would like to add it to our work plan if the committee's in agreement, not particularly specifying a date for it at the moment, but the way that I would like to approach it is to do this as in one of our formal meetings here, rather than having a working group or setting up anything else. We invite Kushti Bok to come and speak to us. We invite representatives from the people who are living in vans in BCP at the moment. And I am actually doing some background work with some people involved. I don't want to speak too much about it to try and help them set up a community interest company. So they'll have a louder voice in this area, which is something I'd hope to be able to invite to this committee were we to do that. And also a third part, which you've not mentioned, Councillor Cooper, and I think ties into this quite well, is the holidaymakers who come to Bournemouth. But by their very nature, a lot of van life communities are nomadic. And whilst they may be based in BCP, they also go to other places. And the same as people like myself, who are a bit of a weekend warrior, who'll jump in the van and go somewhere. We've got opportunities where we can not just support different groups with different needs in BCP who live here, but also potentially create a revenue stream from people who are coming to visit the area as well by providing facilities. So my idea would be to invite a number of representatives to come and actually tell us what they want and how they would feel that we can best help them as a council, and then go from there. You can.
I just wanted to say the other group that I'm not playing devil's advocate, but I'm trying to be even-handed. I quite agree with you, and I have no problem with you, but I do think that we haven't included the residents who complain vociferously to me about the caravans that park on the roads that haven't got any yellow lines and spend weeks there, and because there are toilet facilities in my patch. So I think either you have one meeting with, I mean, you could have residents and the people you are asking to come along, but I think that has to be taken into consideration as well.
Noted. Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we might have examples in all our wards where sometimes there can be a little bit of, unfortunately, a bit of flashpoint between competing demands on space and people's expectation of the use of that space. And I think that's why this should be quite important, because when I think of my ward, there's certainly occasionally, there's been those scenarios, and by looking at how we can move that forward and then providing spaces, it actually takes that problem away from where there might be that kind of conflict, and it's saying, no, we are actually making these spaces available. So by answering that question, I'm not sure we need people to come and say there is a slight problem, because it's implied within the Lake Pier issue that Councillor Cooper said specifically, and I think that we all know at times that that goes on across our wards. Sorry.
In relation to the voice of residents, I think we do hear them. I've spoken to them, I've met them down at Lake Pier. They're constantly bombarding me on my councillor Facebook page, and that they're being listened to. And I think if we can respond by listening to the van lifers and working out a policy that protects all members of the community, then we will kind of, just create a very, a society based on well-being and happiness and co-living and all that kind of stuff, because, that's what's needed, Some of the residents can be quite vicious. That's not right. I shouldn't put that on record. I apologise. They're all lovely.
Okay, Councillor Clements.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to ask, are you proposing that we should allocate specific sites for van lifers to live in, that where we're providing facilities like toilets and showers or whatever it is that they're going to need? Is that what you're saying, that we should actually allocate specific sites around the town?
Yeah, feel free to respond, Councillor Cooper.
Within the motion, it says that we should look at the allocation of spaces. And what we learned, Patrick dug this up, is that the Borough Pool has the right, if you like, for what's called void spaces, or spaces that are a bit, to turn them into somewhere where people can park. There's legislation where you can use that land for this. The other thing is that Lake Pier, we've suggested, until I'm blue in the face with, put lanes at the back. There's toilets already there. People will park in the lanes, and they could income generate. So where we can income generate, what the chair was saying, we do. But where we can't, we provide spaces for those transient mobile populations that are passing through. And this is where it links in with the work with Custy Bock. That's where they can inform us a great deal of those sites. Plus, Councillor Rigby, that in Hamworthy and in others, gypsy mobility, and I'm from Romany, I am a Cooper, so it comes from my family. I move all the time kind of inside. It's seasonal the way they move, and we know I'm ready for when it's going to come. I think, in Hamworthy it's going to be a couple of months' time, and we'll have all the trouble on that field and on that field and on that field. If we know this, then why can't we then be creative in how we approach that? Because we don't do it, do we? We don't, and then we get a bombardment of negative community vibes, which we don't want. We want to make it more of a non-hostile place.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the reasons which I suggested doing it in this open forum, which we have rather than a working group, is that we can get submissions into it, questions and responses. And I think you're right, we do need to look at a way which potentially we can involve one residents group or not. Perhaps it's something we can take back and look at further about exactly how we'll approach it away from now. But from the sounds of it, I'm getting the impression that people think it's an issue which we should be looking into and we would like to add to our work plan. If not reach a resolution on exactly how we do it. But for expediency, I think we can have a agreement to add this to our work plan, and we can take it away and between the Vice Chair and myself look at the best way to approach it and come back with a suggestion, if that sounds good. I'm seeing agreement everywhere. Okay, thanks very much for bringing that to us, Councillor Cooper.
I'm really happy, thank you very much. And I'd like to just publicly thank Lindsay for all the support she gave me, which was really good. She knows her stuff. Thank you.
It's how we get through these meetings. Okay, Lindsay, would you like to introduce the second item which we've got, the climate and nature one?
Will do, Chair. Yeah, the second item is another request from Council following a motion. and that came from your group, Chair, so you might want to expand on this yourself. So just to set it out briefly, the motion says that the committee is asked to support work relating to climate and nature by determining a scrutiny process focused on the relevant key priorities within the corporate plan, with an emphasis on protecting the most vulnerable in society from the effects of climate change. Debate at Council included a discussion on the value that scrutiny could bring in supporting the portfolio holder for climate to drive forward this important area of work through a target and objective setting approach. So almost like you had anticipated your earlier discussions today. Clearly, this is a really broad request. There isn't much more detail around it in terms of how scrutiny should be approached. And we've had some initial discussions with you, Chair, around potentially doing some themed committee sessions, which may be an idea in taking this forward if you want to. Clearly, there's huge complexities in the area of work and vast opportunities for getting involved in this, but it would need more scoping. So really, it's sort of, initially, would you be willing to take this forward? And just one further thing to flag that Councillor Rice asked earlier to me, if I could flag this up, was that following that discussion you had earlier in the climate report, Councillor Rice wanted to ask that as a part of this work, that the committee, if agreeable, adds a work stream item specifically for developing the ongoing annual carbon targets as discussed earlier. So I just want to flag that there.
Great, thank you. Really well explained. And as this is from my group, I'm not going to expand on it further. I'm going to go and see if Councillor Hadley, you wanted to speak on this as the portfolio holder for this area.
Thank you, Chair. I only to say I welcome it. I think it's really important. It's an important topic, and we covered earlier the carbon plan. We didn't cover much about the nature plan and what we do about biodiversity and the collapse in a lot of species that are around us. So that's another important piece of work. It's not measured in numbers so much as the climate aspects. The question, I suppose, is what does this committee want to pick up and cover, and certainly I would give it support to do that.
Thank you. And I'll go to the committee if anyone's got anything they want to ask. Yourself? Yes.
Yeah, just reading the what we're looking at, it's talking about we are to determine a scrutiny process, whereas I don't really think that's what we are looking to do. I think we're probably looking to scrutinise something. To me, a process would be agreeing to set up a task and finish group rather than anything else. But also it then goes on to talk about the relevant key priorities. And I think my question there would be key from what point of view? Are we talking about key from the environment and place? Or are we talking about key like finance within the council is going to be a really key thing, isn't it, at the moment? So I think we just need a bit of clarification on that, particularly taking Councillor Hadley's comments a minute ago about nature and things, when actually this is back to talking about the effect of climate change on the vulnerable. So in what we've got here, we seem to be, to me, to have a number of ambiguities I would like clarified.
So for me on this one, I'll try and answer it as it's come from my group. The intention of this was originally to seek support for the Climate and Nature Bill, which was going through Parliament, and to put BCP's name behind it. The ask of this now coming here to this committee, I've sort of run through it in my head and questioned it a little bit, because I feel like a lot of what is covered in here are work streams which we will already be looking at as part of our actual processes of going through. So to look at this in one holistic way is difficult, because, for example, where we looked at biodiversity net gain, that could easily have fallen within this. Where we've looked at the heathland mitigation strategy, again, this can fit within this. Now, whether we wanted to take this and use it as an area to actually focus some of our scrutiny more on the nature side of the climate element than what we have been doing previously, because you're right, a lot of what we've been looking at, particularly tonight, is very factual on what the council can do and how we can do it. This is much more so, how can BCP Council deliver smart objectives within their corporate plan to encourage the climate response and nature redevelopment plans, if that makes sense. So to be clear, I think this needs to possibly be accepted to go onto the forward plan, but be broken down a little bit, not looked at in one complete session. Actually, it'll feed into multiple streams as a form of reference, and whether that does end up becoming a working group into somewhere or not, I don't yet know until we get a bit of direction based on the existing policies which we've got and want to scrutinise.
Is it fair to say, looking at the last part of the statement, with emphasis on protecting the most vulnerable, that's almost something that's going to be overriding? It's going to be in everything we discuss around this, really. So there may be a few areas that have fallen through the cracks. You've identified a number that have already been included. So it strikes me that perhaps when we talk about process, what we're really talking about is a bit like we would have a sort of financial summary or an equalities impact assessment, or those sort of things, that we specifically look at the effect on vulnerable people from climate change in relation to that topic. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it is. So this is really a discussion between us two, isn't it? I think it is. And I mean, we've touched on it tonight, haven't we, with the housing strategy as well, and how that develops into it. And it does touch on multiple portfolios across where we are. So to use it as a more of a scoping exercise, I think, might be how we do it. And I think when we've talked about how we do scrutiny in the past, like looking through the eye of certain elements, that this is actually folds into that, and how we look into different areas. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I agree with you in the sense that I think we need to slice this over possibly a period of time, and in terms of inviting people to come and give a view. I mean, I've talked to you previously, admittedly briefly, about, for example, Southern IFCO, which I sit on, which is the Southern Inland Fishing Authority. So, and I went up to see Daniel Franklin, who's a professor and does deals with the water in Poole Harbour. So, and there are huge issues. Well, huge issues here. Nitrates, the Pacific oyster that we use, the native oysters that are being experimented with in the Solent, the seagrass that is being it's all that. So that's an area of the environment that is particular to Poole and Christchurch, and it's something that I think we would need to look at. So if we had somebody from them coming in to talk to us about, because they're an enforcement authority as well as an environment authority, and it covers a large area, and then there would be other people on Radio 4 before we came in, and thanks to the traffic jam, I managed to listen to it before coming into here. There were talks between the Hereford, I think it was, where they've got issues over bypasses, areas of wetland that need to be looked after, and buildings. So yeah, I just think that the slice is the area, and we bring in as many people that we've got time to deal with.
Thank you. Lindsay, can I come to you, and then Councillor Hadley, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I was only going to offer a bit of direction in that if you are minded that you want to take this piece of work forward, because it is so difficult to determine how you want to do this, perhaps it might be helpful to put out a call to the committee by email for a week or so to send in any and every idea they've got, and then you as chair and vice chair could perhaps work through that with officers to see how that could emerge as a potential piece of work.
Councillor Hadley. Thank you for that, Lindsay. Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Councillor Hadley.
Yes, thank you. Well, just following on from what Councillor Goodall was just talking about, I know there's a petition on its way to us regarding Christchurch Harbour and water quality in the River Stour and Avon, and a significant interest from the public in that. And I think they think that Poole Harbour is in a much better position, and it has better protections, but it has its own problems. Which I'd
has.
like to slow down.
Yeah.
The other bit of that is the Dorset Nature Recovery strategy. So there's a whole piece there, which is a piece of work that's being led from Dorset Council, but we are partners there with Natural England, and that's not yet come forward. So I think there are a number of strands, and as you say, there are lots of pieces of work that come through with this label, and I suppose part of maybe this piece is about, are we hitting all the bits, or how does these all join together, and are we making as much progress as we possibly can? And it's difficult because we're a very urban area and we're reliant on things with partners, statutory partners, and also the public.
Thank you. With that, is everyone happy to go with what Lindsay has suggested there, that we have a bit of a round robin email over the next week or two, and we put down all our ideas in that, and then myself and the vice chair will scope out exactly how we want to approach it and try and cover off as many of those suggestions, if not all of them, that we can, and see how it fits with our upcoming work plan and how we can put it in, and also our focus. Does that sound good to everyone? Councillor Martin, of course you can.
So in terms of if anyone put forward at some later date a submission through the standard process of submitting items that fitted into this, could that be folded? I mean, it depends on what sort of timeline you're talking about, addressing all those items that people might send in over whatever period of time. Then does that sort of just become like an ongoing thing, or what?
I would say to be decided on how it comes in. Obviously, everyone's always welcome to submit anything to this committee through the formal processes, and we've got one tonight as the fourth one as well. So, and it'll go through exactly the same process as what we're going through now of where it should fit in, and we can obviously as a committee choose to prioritise whatever elements we think should be given most priority. We don't need to stick to what is scheduled in the future. If we wanted to mix things around, we always have the gift to be able to do that ourselves. Is that okay then? Is everyone happy to go with that suggestion? And we can move on to the third item.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. So that is the cliff and coastal erosion management, which is from the portfolio holder, Councillor Herrett, who is here with us. But Lindsay, did you want to introduce that a little bit as well?
Again, Chair, it's set out in the paper. This is a request for you to scrutinise that area, specifically to look at how BCP manages its coastal and cliff erosion now and into the future. What are the challenges? How's this area of work funded? How will it be funded in the future? And how is this work communicated to residents and the wider public? So Councillor Herrett will be able to expand. It sounds like it's suited to either a shortish working group or a report into committee if the committee is minded to go with it.
Thanks, Lindsay. Councillor Herrett, do you want to give us a brief overview?
So I brought this as a request in the face of the continued cliff slips that we see along the coastline. They cost significant amounts of money and resource to manage, and they also take a long time to deal with, because if a cliff does slip, leaving the slip in place can prevent further cliff slips, which obviously creates disruption to the seafront, causes accessibility issues for all sorts of users. There's also long-term issues around the cliffs, about obviously as they erode, they get closer and closer to buildings on the cliff top, which has a risk. And significant investment is needed, probably to resolve some of these issues, and I think it probably needs a proper thorough going through at scrutiny as a result, because it's just such a wide-ranging topic that affects a lot of our residents.
Thank you. Committee, any thoughts on that? Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I have to say, when I first read it, because it's obviously something of real immediacy as well, in terms of like how we're dealing with that, in terms of for places essentially falling apart while we're looking at it, and it's like, what is the response now? So your drive is to say you can do multiple things over, so you could just leave it in place forever and a day. Is that the kind of real, yeah?
So obviously we're responding to cliff slips as they happen, and not ignoring them and trying to mitigate against them. But there's also a really long-term thing with coastal erosion. The beach has got bigger and bigger over the years, and that is not so that we have a nice sandy beach for tourists. That is so that we stop cliff erosion. With sea levels rising and climate change, that erosion is happening quicker. There's some question marks about whether the prom would need to be higher in the long term, but it's talking billions of pounds worth of investment to deal with that. And obviously cliff stabilisation as well, as more and more water comes through the cliffs, long-term drainage solutions and all sorts of things like that. So there is a short-term immediacy that is being dealt with, but there's also some significant long-term things to consider.
Sorry, I know it's sort of delving into bits from our interest, so if you want me to like send emails later, that's fine. But it's just like, just in terms of that immediacy. So, but like, yeah, so addressing that situation right now, there's still decisions that can be made that I'm trying to think. So like, for instance, going back to where you're saying you can leave slips in place because that will prevent further slips. You know, I'm just sort of thinking about at what point does this where does it move from the immediacy to the long term, right? Which is what the idea of the scrutiny would be.
Yeah, how do we get into the geology of it? Councillor Hadley, you wanted to add something there?
Thank you. Yes, this is a bit of a joint responsibility between Councillor Harris and I because the flooding and coastal risk erosion team report through to me. And we have got some pretty serious science going on in terms of understanding the problem. It is a big problem, and the amount of money that we can get from external sources, particularly grant and aid from the Environment Agency, depends on houses being at risk. So we can get money to help us, and we have had for things like the groins and the beach replenishment, or we can't easily get central money for the cliffs falling down on top of the prom. So there's kind of something around. It is a complicated problem. We are increasingly understanding it, and it is partly recent work that we've done, looking at things that were put in place back in the 1980s that haven't really been maintained, and how we can better look at those going forwards. In many parts of the country, they're looking at managed retreat. We have a policy of hold the line, which is where we are trying to hold the line. If you look at the cliff falls in West Dorset, there have been some really significant ones, and retreat and moving the coastal path back and losing farmland because they can afford to do that. As Councillor Herrick said, we have houses, hotels and businesses at the top of the cliff, and therefore that's part of why we're getting the grant and aid monies. But I suppose it's partly just having that opportunity, if the committee want it, to have clarity around that. But we can bore you with huge amounts of science if you're interested.
Thank you. Yeah, the FCERN team are one of my favourite teams in BCP. The work they do is brilliant. I think we had them in, it was probably 18 months ago, wasn't it, when they came and gave us an overview of all their projects and which they were doing. And I understand that this is a deeper dive into a particular area of projects they're working on. I've got a question, Lindsay. You might be able to help me for it, because I always get my pronunciation wrong with this, and I know exactly we can use it. One of the abilities that Scrutiny has is to use, is it a rapporteur who can go into an area and explore it as like an individual? Could you explain whether that would be able to be something we could use on this item and how it would work, if so?
Yeah, Chair. The Constitution sets out that this is something you could set out. We don't use it that often, but in effect, it's like having a member champion that you agree as a committee will be someone that will liaise with officers, relevant portfolio holders, informally, and just keeping up, gather information and keep updated on an issue, and then report back into committee as and when there's things to say or you request an update. So it can be a really good way of keeping abreast of issues without using up significant committee resource. So it's just a case of agreeing who that would be as a committee, if you want to do that. And of course, you could go away and do that informally and agree it in a future meeting.
Thank you. I thought I had it right. It's just, like I said, it's something which we've not used before. And I think as we've had the SN team in, it may be something we want to explore if there was a particular interest from someone to go away and really get into the nitty gritty of this more than we could do in another way. So it was just an option. Yeah, Councillor.
I think a couple of things. I think the first thing obviously would be to ask Councillor Herrett, since he's brought this forward. But the second thing is the description here is to essentially almost brainstorm it and get as many ideas as, are we doing everything we can? That doesn't strike me as something you want to focus on one person. You probably want the widest range of people you can for that particular project, just as a thought.
Thank you. Councillor Rice?
Yes, for me, this I'm very, very interested. It sounds fascinating, but I wouldn't want to be a single person trying to delve into it. For me, that would already be the officers, I suppose. For me, this is there's huge potential here for communication to the public about the cliffs and how climate change is impacting our town, and so I see this as a almost like sort of a reasonable sized piece of work that lots of us should be would be interested in, and for example, maybe a day event whereby we're inviting anybody in, sort of interested businesses around there, interested residents, and we sort of do lots of workshops about understanding what the issues are and what the potential options are, and the timescales of these issues, because there's a lot of confusion about the timescales of coastal erosion and when our beach will be eroded. So yeah, I'm sort of erring on the side of a bigger piece of ONS work.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Lindsay?
Yeah, just to say, in terms of rapporteurs, you can set up a pair of rapporteurs if that is something that you would want to do. In terms of what Councillor Rice's suggestion, that sounds like an inquiry day that she's suggesting. It's a really excellent way to do scrutiny, but it is really also very resource intensive, so it can take quite a while to bring together because of that, but can have really good outcomes and swifter outcomes. And the final point I wanted to raise was that if you feel that you need to actually understand a bit more about this issue before deciding how you would do any work on it, if any, there's of course always the option of having an informal briefing just to understand a bit more about what's the status quo at the moment and how do we do things.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm getting the impression everyone seems to be again in favour of this being added to the work plan in some way or other. So if we can agree to do it and again scope out exactly how it's going to be done after this meeting when we've got a bit more time to be able to go through it, if everyone is agreed with that. Excellent. Thanks for bringing that to us, Councillor Herrett. One day we might turn something down, but I feel like it's never going to happen because we're far too interested in all these things. So the final one is the scrutiny request from Councillor Rice. Lindsay, do you want to give a quick intro? Or yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really quick, Chair. So this, Councillor Rice will expand, but she's asking for an update on progress towards establishing a place streets policy for BCP Council, and she set out more detail in the request form. This is really asking that some attention be brought to this as an issue by the committee, and really just asking for a briefing and an update on progress at this stage. So in terms of how that's delivered, you could either request something into committee or even consider having something circulated outside a committee that you then reference on your next agenda so that there's an audit trail and the public can see that. So probably a lighter item in terms of actual resource, but Councillor Rice will be able to explain the ask better.
Thank you, Lindsay. Councillor Rice?
Oh, thank you. So yeah, this is something that I've been trying to get in place for sort of, I think, since I became a councillor, and there's been various reasons why it hasn't been able to be progressed, but I wanted to use the facility of the overview and scrutiny formal process to ensure that it does happen. And so this is a relatively simple one. I've been communicating with the transport team and it is in progress. But I wanted to ensure that it does get finished and that it is recorded as an outcome of an ONS sort of work plan. it's a very small thing, but I think it's from a ONS sort of procedural experimentation. I would like to be able to see other councillors with small projects that are struggling to get it through just because it's not very significant and other projects keep getting prioritised, whether if we can bring them through ONS in this sort of manner, it helps councillors to get empowered to get little projects off the ground that are in keeping with all of the BCP council policies. So my recommendation for this is just that it is added to the work to the next meeting for an update. Probably just from myself would be sufficient.
Okay, thank you,
Does
Councillor.
that explain?
I think you've done a pretty good job of explaining it. Yeah, yeah. Any discussion on that? Imagine if it was the first one we rejected. Oh. No, I'm very sold on this. I actually like the idea even more now that you've explained what you wanted to see and the reasoning behind it. I think you say small things. I don't think it is a small thing. I think we've shown a commitment through this committee that we've got a real interest in play, and the involvement which we had with the development of the play strategy from almost the formation of this committee, I think shows testament to this, and this is a natural step on to continue an exploration of play in a different way. So I think it's a great thing for us to add in again to the work plan, and then to be agreed exactly how it should come to us, whether that is just an update from yourself or whether we look at something a little bit more in depth for it. So if everyone is happy again to add that to the forward plan. Okay, yeah, that looks like that's agreed as well. Brilliant, thank you. And with that, all that takes us onto is the confirm that. Oh, sorry, Lindsay.
Hi, yeah, I'm really sorry to just come back again, and I'm very aware of the time, but I think what Councillor Rice was asking was to bring an update to your next meeting. So if you were to agree to that, rather than taking it away in principle, I'm just wondering whether you can just agree for that to come to your next meeting, providing there's capacity, or whether you do indeed want to take it away and look further down the line. I just wasn't clear on what the agreement is there.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Has anyone got a preference? Would everyone be happy with Councillor Rice giving an update at the next meeting? And then perhaps if we wanted to explore it further, we can go from that point. So we can add that on to the next meeting then for a verbal update from yourself, Councillor Rice.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, the only other thing is if the committee is content with the remainder of the work plan, which is in Appendix B on the work plan, which is our next meeting being on the 2nd of April, which will be the Planning Service Improvement Scrutiny and the Safer Accommodation Strategy Working Group findings, and Councillor Rice's update on Play Streets policy. Councillor Northover.
I don't know if it's the right, but you did say date of next meeting amongst all that, and I just wondered if I could mention that I wonder if we haven't got so many people because we were so near to our very long meeting last night, and could we try and get away from having them running next to the full council meetings?
I think we can ask Dem Services officers to look at that, because it's a very valid point. I think we're all knackered. Yeah, okay, and then the only other thing for me to say in this meeting is that the Safe Accommodation Working Group has almost completed its work, and where that should be reporting its findings again into the next meeting. So we'll have those two additional smaller items as well, which aren't currently on the work plan, but will be, if everyone's happy with that. And in which case, I can say that the date of the next meeting probably will be the 2nd of April, but we can at least look in the future with Democratic Services to see how we can schedule them to try and be a little bit easier with full council meetings. So thank you everyone who's been watching. Thanks for all the people who've brought their reports to us. Sorry it's been a bit of a long one tonight, but I think we've done some really good work and look forward to seeing you all in a few months. Good night.